This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I was shaking as I typed this, reliving the terror of that camping trip gone horribly wrong. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway with my 3 closest friends, Jake, Mia, and Tyler. We'd been planning it for weeks, excited to escape the city and enjoy some time in nature. If only we'd known what was waiting for us in those woods. We arrived at the campsite late Friday afternoon. It was a beautiful spot, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. We quickly set up our tents and got a fire going as the sun began to set. Sitting around the campfire that first night, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories, everything felt perfect. We had no idea of the nightmare that was about to unfold. The next morning, we decided to go for a hike and explore the surrounding forest. It was a gorgeous day, clear blue skies, a light breeze rustling through the trees. We packed some snacks and water and set off down one of the trails leading deeper into the woods. At first, we were just enjoying the scenery and each other's company. But after about an hour of hiking, things started to feel off. I can't quite explain it, but there was a heaviness in the air, an oppressive stillness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The bird song and insect noises that had filled the forest earlier had gone quiet. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. "Guys, does anyone else feel weird?" Mia asked, voicing what we were all thinking. Jake tried to laugh it off. "It's probably just our imaginations running wild. Too many horror movies, you know?" But I could see the uneasiness in his eyes. We all felt it, that creeping sense that something wasn't right. We continued on for another 15 minutes or so, the tension building with each step. That's when we stumbled upon it. Through a gap in the trees, we caught a glimpse of what looked like buildings, crude wooden structures hidden deep in the forest where no buildings should be. Curiosity got the better of us. We crept closer, moving as quietly as we could through the underbrush. As we neared the edge of a small clearing, we saw it clearly. A compound of some kind, with several small cabins arranged in a circle around a larger central building. "What the hell?" Tyler whispered. "Who would build something way out here?" Before anyone could answer, we heard it, chanting. Low at first, but growing steadily louder. It was coming from the central building. The words were in no language I recognized, guttural and harsh. A chill ran down my spine. We should have left right then. Every instinct was screaming at me to run. But a morbid fascination kept us rooted to the spot as the chanting grew louder and louder. Suddenly, the door of the central building burst open. What I saw next will haunt me for the rest of my days. Figures in long, hooded robes came pouring out of the building. There must have been at least 20 of them. They formed a circle in the clearing, still chanting in that strange language. In the center of the circle, 2 of the robed figures were dragging something. No, someone. It was a person, bound and gagged. Even from our hiding spot, I could see the terror in their eyes as they struggled against their captors. My blood ran cold as I realized what we were witnessing. This was some kind of ritual, some sick ceremony, and we were about to see something truly horrific. I turned to my friends, ready to tell them we needed to get the hell out of there immediately. But before I could open my mouth, I saw Jake's foot slip on the uneven ground. He stumbled, grabbing onto a branch to steady himself. The branch snapped with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the silent forest. The chanting stopped abruptly. As one, all the robed figures turned to look in our direction. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Then Mia screamed, "Run!" We took off sprinting through the forest, crashing through the underbrush in blind panic. I could hear shouts behind us, the pounding of feet in pursuit. My lungs were burning as we ran, branches whipping at my face and arms. I had no idea where we were going. All I knew was that we had to get away from that nightmarish scene. "This way," Jake yelled, veering off to the right. We followed without question, desperate for any direction in the chaos. The sound of our pursuers was getting closer. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. I caught a glimpse of robed figures moving through the trees behind us with inhuman speed. Just when I thought my legs were about to give out, we burst out of the tree line. We found ourselves at the edge of a steep ravine, a river churning far below. "We're trapped!" Tyler cried out in despair, but Jake was already moving, scrambling down the rocky slope towards the water. "It's our only chance. We have to jump." It was insane, completely reckless. But as I heard the cultists crashing through the trees behind us, I knew Jake was right. It was certain death if we stayed here. Taking a deep breath, I followed Jake down the treacherous incline. Rocks slid out from under my feet with every step. I half ran, half slid down the slope, my heart pounding in my ears. I heard a scream and looked back to see Mia lose her footing. She tumbled down the rocky slope, crying out in pain as she rolled. Tyler managed to grab her arm, pulling her to her feet. They continued down together, supporting each other. We reached a ledge about 30 feet above the churning river. Jake didn't hesitate. He took a running leap and plunged into the water below. I froze for a moment, paralyzed by fear. But then I heard shouts from above. The cultists had reached the edge of the ravine. With no time left to think, I jumped. The fall seemed to last forever. Then I hit the water with a painful smack that knocked the wind out of me. The current immediately swept me downstream, tumbling me head over heels. I fought my way to the surface, gasping for air. I caught glimpses of my friends around me as we were carried swiftly downriver. The roar of the water drowned out any sounds from our pursuers. I prayed they wouldn't be crazy enough to follow us into the raging river. It felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes before the current slowed enough for us to make our way to the shore. We dragged ourselves onto a small, rocky beach, coughing and sputtering. For a long moment we just lay there, too exhausted to move or speak. Finally, Jake broke the silence. Is everyone okay?" he managed between ragged breaths. We all nodded, though okay was a relative term. We were scraped, bruised, and soaking wet, but miraculously alive. "What the hell was that?" Tyler asked, his voice shaking. "Who were those people? What were they doing?" Nobody had an answer. We sat in stunned silence, trying to process the horrors we'd just witnessed. "We need to get out of here," Mia said finally. "We need to go to the police." We all agreed, but there was one big problem. We had no idea where we were. Our phones were waterlogged and useless. We were lost, with no supplies, no way to contact help, and the terrifying knowledge that there were dangerous cultists in these woods. What followed was the most grueling hike of my life. We picked a direction and started walking, hoping to find a road or some sign of civilization. Every snapping twig made us jump. Every shadow seemed to hold hidden threats. The sun was setting by the time we finally stumbled onto a dirt road. We followed it for another hour before a car finally came along, an old pickup truck driven by a concerned-looking older man. He took one look at our bedraggled state and immediately offered us a ride to the nearest town. As we piled into the truck bed, relief washed over me. We were safe. We'd made it out alive. But the nightmare wasn't over. When we went to the local police station to report what we'd seen, they were skeptical, to say the least. They took our statements. but I could tell they didn't really believe us. They said they'd send someone to check it out, but I doubt they ever did. We tried to go back once, a few weeks later, with a larger group, but we couldn't find the compound again. It was like it had vanished into thin air. To this day, I don't know what we stumbled upon in those woods. Sometimes I try to convince myself it was all some kind of shared hallucination or mass hysteria, but then I'll catch a glimpse of a hooded figure out of the corner of my eye, or wake up in a cold sweat with that strange chanting echoing in my mind. I know what we saw was real, and I know those cultists are still out there somewhere, hidden in the dark depths of the forest, waiting for their next victim. I was so excited for our family camping trip in the Adirondacks. My parents had been planning it for months, and my little sister Emma couldn't stop talking about all the s'mores she was going to eat. As the oldest at 16, I was looking forward to some peace and quiet away from my phone and all the drama of high school. The first day was perfect. We hiked up to a secluded spot near a crystal-clear lake, surrounded by towering pines. Dad showed us how to set up the tents while Mom got a fire going. Emma and I splashed around in the shallows, trying to catch tiny fish with our hands. As the sun set, we roasted hot dogs and marshmallows, laughing at Dad's corny jokes. I remember thinking how nice it was to see everyone so relaxed and happy. If only I'd known what was coming. I woke up in the middle of the night to a weird scratching sound. At first, I thought it was just a raccoon or something rooting through our cooler. But then I heard muffled thumps and what sounded like fabric tearing. My heart started racing as I unzipped the tent flap and peeked out. What I saw made my blood run cold. Our campsite looked like it had been hit by a tornado. Clothes and gear were strewn everywhere. The picnic table was overturned, and our food was scattered across the ground. But the worst part was our other tent, the one my parents and Emma were sleeping in. It was shredded, with huge claw marks ripped through the sides. I scrambled out of my tent, calling for my family in a panic. "Mom, Dad, Emma!" There was no answer. I ran to their tent, my hands shaking as I unzipped what was left of the door. Empty. They were gone. For a moment, I just stood there in shock, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I heard a twig snap in the woods behind me. I whirled around, half expecting to see a bear or mountain lion, but there was nothing there, just darkness between the trees. I grabbed a flashlight and started searching the campsite, calling for my family. As I swept the beam of light around, I noticed strange tracks in the dirt. Definitely not animal prints, but not normal human footprints either. They were oddly elongated, with sharp points at the toes. A chill ran down my spine as I followed them to the edge of our clearing. Just as I was about to step into the trees, I heard my dad's voice. "Son, over here!" I sprinted toward the sound, relief flooding through me. I found my parents by the lake, looking shaken but unharmed. "What happened?" I asked. "Where's Emma?" The fear in my mom's eyes made my stomach drop. "We don't know," she said, her voice quavering. "Something attacked the tent. Your father fought it off, but in the chaos—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Dad put his arm around her. "We've been searching, but we can't find her. I was just about to come wake you up when we heard you calling. I felt like I was going to be sick." "We have to find her," I said. "I'll go deeper into the woods. You guys keep searching around here and try to call for help." My parents protested, but I knew I had to go. Emma was out there somewhere, probably terrified. I couldn't just sit around waiting for rescue. I headed into the forest, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Every shadow looked menacing. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. I kept calling Emma's name, straining my ears for any response. After what felt like hours of searching, I was about to turn back when I heard a faint cry. "Help! Someone help me!" It was Emma's voice, and it was coming from up ahead. I ran toward the sound, branches whipping my face. I burst into a small clearing and saw Emma huddled at the base of a huge oak tree. Relief washed over me as I rushed to her side. "Are you okay? What happened?" I asked, checking her for injuries. She was shaking, her eyes wide with fear. "There was a monster," she whispered. "It grabbed me and brought me here. I think it was going to eat me." I hugged her tightly. "It's okay. You're safe now. Let's get back to Mom and Dad." But as I helped Emma to her feet, I heard heavy breathing behind me. I turned slowly, my heart pounding. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. It was vaguely humanoid, but much taller and broader than any person. Its skin was a sickly gray color, and its limbs were unnaturally long and thin. But its face, God, its face. It had no eyes that I could see, just a wide, gaping mouth filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. I pushed Emma behind me, desperately looking for an escape route. The creature took a step forward, its jaw unhinging like a snake about to strike. In that moment, pure adrenaline took over. I grabbed the heaviest branch I could find and swung it with all my might at the monster's head. It connected with a sickening crunch, and the creature stumbled back. I scooped up Emma and ran. I ran faster than I ever have in my life, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about the thorns tearing at my skin. I could hear the thing crashing after us, its ragged breathing getting closer. Just when I thought we couldn't go any further, I saw flashlights up ahead. "Help!" I screamed. "Over here!" It was our parents and a group of forest rangers. They came running toward us, and I nearly collapsed with relief. As soon as we reached them, I turned around, ready to point out the monster. But there was nothing there, no sign of the creature, no sound of pursuit. It had vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The rangers searched the area, but found nothing except some strange tracks, the same elongated footprints I'd seen earlier. They were baffled, saying they'd never seen anything like it before. We cut our trip short, obviously. None of us felt safe staying another night. As we drove home, I kept replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of what had happened. Part of me wanted to believe it was just some sick person in a costume, playing a twisted prank. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The way it moved, the inhuman sounds it made, that was no mask. It's been months now, and I still have nightmares about that night. I've scoured the internet for similar stories, for any explanation of what we encountered, but I've found nothing concrete. All I know is that something is out there in those woods, something that shouldn't exist, and I pray to God I never see it again. I was a volunteer with the local search and rescue team for years, but nothing could have prepared me for that day in the wilderness. It started like any other call-out. A hiker had gone missing in the dense forest about 50 miles outside of town. We'd done dozens of similar searches before, usually finding the lost person within a day or two, cold and scared but ultimately safe. This time was different. Our team of 6 set out at dawn, driving as far as we could on the logging roads before continuing on foot. The missing hiker, a man in his 30s named Mark, had last been seen 3 days ago when he separated from his group to take some photos. His friends waited at the trailhead for hours, but he never returned. As we hiked deeper into the forest, an unsettling feeling crept over me. The usual sounds of birds and small animals were absent, replaced by an eerie silence. Even the wind seemed unnaturally still. I tried to shake it off as nerves, but I could tell the rest of the team felt it too. We called out Mark's name periodically, our voices echoing strangely through the trees. By mid-afternoon, we'd covered several miles of rugged terrain with no sign of our missing hiker. We were about to take a break when Sam, our team leader, held up his hand for us to stop. He pointed to something ahead, unnatural shapes barely visible through the foliage. As we approached cautiously, my skin began to crawl. It was some kind of makeshift altar, crudely constructed from branches and stones. Strange symbols were carved into the surrounding tree trunks, and bits of fur and bone were scattered on the ground. The whole scene radiated a palpable sense of menace. "What the hell is this?" whispered Rachel, another team member. No one had an answer. Sam radioed back to base camp to report what we'd found. The response crackled through, breaking the oppressive silence. "Document everything, but don't disturb the site," could be evidence. We spent the next hour photographing the altar and surroundings. The symbols were like nothing I'd ever seen, twisting patterns that hurt my eyes to look at directly. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, Sam made the call to set up camp for the night. None of us wanted to, but continuing the search in the dark would be too dangerous. That night was the longest of my life. We took turns keeping watch, but I don't think anyone really slept. Strange noises echoed through the darkness, rhythmic chanting, animalistic howls, the crack of branches underfoot. Yet whenever we shone our flashlights into the trees, there was nothing there. As soon as the first hint of dawn broke, we broke camp and continued our search. The oppressive atmosphere had only intensified overnight. We found more ritualistic sites as we pushed deeper into the forest. Circles of stones, crude effigies hanging from trees, more of those unsettling symbols. It was mid-morning when we heard it, a faint cry for help, barely audible over the sound of a nearby stream. We raced towards the source, hearts pounding. As we crested a small ridge, the scene before us stopped us in our tracks. In a small clearing stood a group of maybe a dozen people, all wearing dark robes adorned with those same twisted symbols. They were gathered around a crude stone altar, upon which lay a bound figure, Mark, the missing hiker. He was alive but barely conscious. For a moment we all froze in shock. Then training kicked in, and Sam began barking orders. "Rachel, John, circle left. Emily and David with me. Tom, call for backup now." The robed figures turned towards us, their faces hidden by deep hoods. As one, they began to chant in a language I didn't recognize. The sound made my head swim and my vision blur. I fought to stay focused as we spread out, trying to flank the group. What happened next is still a blur in my memory. The cultists, for lack of a better word, rushed at us with surprising speed. They wielded crude weapons, sharpened sticks and jagged stones. We had only our standard gear, flashlights, first aid kits, a couple of knives for utility work. I remember the sickening crunch as my flashlight connected with a cultist's skull, the warm spray of blood as Rachel slashed wildly with her knife, Sam's pained cry as a jagged stone opened a gash in his arm. Through it all, that maddening chant continued, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Just when I thought we were about to be overwhelmed, the cavalry arrived. The sound of ATVs and shouting voices filled the air as local law enforcement and more SAR teams poured into the clearing. The cultists scattered into the woods, melting away like smoke. In the aftermath, we found ourselves sitting dazed on the forest floor as paramedics tended to our wounds and police secured the scene. Mark, the hiker we'd come to rescue, was alive but severely dehydrated and showing signs of drugging. He babbled incoherently about the old ones and the coming darkness. The investigation that followed turned up more questions than answers. The cultists were never found, despite an extensive manhunt. Experts brought in to examine the symbols and artifacts couldn't agree on their origin or meaning. Mark eventually recovered physically, but was never quite the same mentally. As for me, I quit search and rescue work after that day. I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stumbled upon something ancient and evil, something that was never meant to be discovered. Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, that otherworldly chanting echoing in my ears. And on dark nights, when the wind whispers through the trees, I can't help but wonder, what's really out there in the wilderness? It was mid-September, and I had decided to take advantage of the quieter off-season for a solo backpacking trip. The autumn colors were just starting to emerge, painting the landscape in vibrant hues of red and gold. As I hiked deeper into the backcountry, I felt that familiar sense of peace wash over me. This was where I belonged. I set up camp in a small clearing, about 10 miles from the nearest trailhead. It was a perfect spot, a babbling creek nearby, plenty of flat ground for my tent, and a natural rock formation that would shield me from the wind. As I went through my usual routine of setting up camp and cooking dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I chalked it up to normal wilderness jitters and tried to relax. As night fell, I crawled into my tent and drifted off to sleep, lulled by the sounds of the forest. I'm not sure how long I'd been asleep when a noise jolted me awake. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it again, a distinct rustling sound, very close to my tent. My heart started racing as I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. There it was again, accompanied by heavy breathing. My first thought was that it must be a raccoon or maybe a deer, curious about my campsite, but then I heard a low, rumbling growl that made my blood run cold. This was no raccoon. I frantically tried to remember everything I knew about bear encounters: make noise, appear big, don't run. But all of that advice seemed useless as I lay trapped in my flimsy nylon tent, feeling more vulnerable than I ever had in my life. The rustling grew louder, and I could hear powerful footsteps circling my tent. My hand fumbled for my headlamp, and I clicked it on, hoping the sudden light might scare the animal away. Through the thin fabric of the tent, I could see an enormous silhouette. It was unmistakably a bear, and a big one at that. My mind raced, trying to recall if I had left any food out that might have attracted it, but I knew I had been careful, hanging my bear bag far from camp as I always did. This bear wasn't here for food. It was curious, or worse, predatory. I held my breath as the bear sniffed at the tent, its hot breath visible in the cool night air. It let out another low growl, and I felt the tent shake as it batted at it with its paw. The thin fabric was the only thing between me and 800 pounds of apex predator. In that moment, I was certain I was going to die. I thought about my family, my friends, all the things I'd left unsaid. I wondered if they'd ever find my body, or if I'd just become another statistic, another foolish hiker who underestimated the wilderness. But some primal instinct for survival kicked in. I knew I couldn't just lie there and wait to be mauled. With shaking hands, I reached for my bear spray, holding it at the ready. Then, mustering every ounce of courage I had, I unzipped the tent and burst out, making as much noise as I could. "Hey, bear, get out of here!" I bellowed, my voice cracking with fear. I waved my arms wildly, trying to appear as large and intimidating as possible. The bear, startled by my sudden appearance, took a step back, but it didn't flee. Instead, it rose up on its hind legs, towering over me at what must have been close to 10 feet tall. I've never felt so small and insignificant as I did in that moment, staring up at this magnificent and terrifying creature. Its eyes gleamed in the moonlight, sizing me up. I could smell its musty, wild scent, see the steam rising from its mouth as it let out another bone-chilling growl. My hand tightened on the bear spray, but I hesitated to use it. I knew from my wilderness training that it should be a last resort, and that it could potentially enrage the bear further if used incorrectly. So I stood my ground, continuing to shout and make myself look big, praying that the bear would lose interest and wander off. For what felt like an eternity, we were locked in this standoff. My legs trembled with the effort of standing still, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I knew that would be a death sentence. Bears can outrun humans easily, especially on uneven terrain. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, when my voice was growing hoarse from shouting and my arms ached from waving, I heard something that made my heart soar. Human voices coming up the trail. "Hello? Is someone there?" A man's voice called out. "Help!" I screamed, my eyes never leaving the bear. "Bear! There's a bear!" I heard quickened footsteps, and then two beams of light cut through the darkness. The bear, distracted by the new arrivals, dropped back down to all fours. It let out one final irritated growl before lumbering off into the woods. As the bear disappeared into the shadows, my legs gave out, and I collapsed to the ground, my whole body shaking with adrenaline and relief. The two hikers, a couple in their 50s who introduced themselves as Tom and Linda, rushed to my side. "Are you all right?" Linda asked, her face etched with concern. "We heard shouting and came to investigate. Thank goodness we did." I nodded, still too shaken to speak. Tom handed me a water bottle, which I gratefully accepted. As I sipped the cool water, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. I had come face to face with one of nature's most fearsome predators, and lived to tell the tale. The couple insisted on staying with me for the rest of the night, setting up their tent right next to mine. We took turns keeping watch, though I doubt any of us slept much. As the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, we packed up camp in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. As we hiked back to the trailhead together, Tom and Linda peppered me with questions about the encounter. How big was the bear? Was it a grizzly or a black bear? Had I seen any cubs? I answered as best I could, but much of the encounter was a blur of fear and adrenaline. What I do remember, with crystal clarity, is the moment when the bear stood up on its hind legs. The sheer power and majesty of the animal, even in my terror, had left an indelible mark on my psyche. I had always respected nature, but this experience had given me a new understanding of my place in the wilderness. Back at the ranger station, we reported the encounter. The rangers weren't surprised. There had been increased bear activity in the area recently, due to a poor berry crop driving them to seek food elsewhere. They commended me on my actions, saying that standing my ground and making noise was exactly what I should have done. As I drove home that afternoon, my hands still shaking slightly on the steering wheel, I found myself filled with a mix of emotions. There was residual fear, of course, and a newfound respect for the raw power of nature. But there was also a sense of accomplishment, of having faced one of my greatest fears and survived. That night changed me. It didn't diminish my love for the outdoors, but it did make me more cautious, more aware of the risks. I've continued to camp and hike, but I'm more diligent than ever about bear safety. I've taken additional wilderness survival courses and invested in better gear. But more than anything, that night gave me a profound appreciation for the wildness that still exists in our world. In an age where so much of nature has been tamed or destroyed, there are still places where we humans are not at the top of the food chain. It's a humbling thought, but also an exhilarating one. Every time I close my eyes, I can still see that bear rising up against the starry sky. It's an image that both terrifies and awes me, a reminder of the incredible, dangerous beauty of the natural world. And while I hope I never have another encounter that close, a part of me is grateful for the experience. It taught me respect, humility, and the true meaning of survival. There were 6 of us, myself, Jake, Mia, Tyler, Olivia, and Devin. We'd all been close throughout college, but looking back, I realized there were some underlying tensions I'd been oblivious to. We arrived at the campsite on a beautiful sunny afternoon. As we set up our tents and unpacked, everyone seemed to be in good spirits. We cracked open some beers and started reminiscing about our college days. But as the night wore on and more alcohol was consumed, the mood started to shift. It began with some passive-aggressive comments between Mia and Olivia. I knew they'd had a falling out over a guy last year, but I thought they'd moved past it. Clearly not. Their sniping escalated into a full-blown argument, with accusations of betrayal and backstabbing flying. The rest of us tried to calm them down, but it only made things worse. That's when Jake jumped in, defending Olivia and hurling insults at Mia. Tyler, who I later learned had secretly been hooking up with Mia, got in Jake's face. Suddenly fists were flying, and the 2 guys were brawling on the ground. Devin and I tried desperately to break it up, but in the chaos, I took an elbow to the face that sent me reeling. Blood streaming from my nose, I stumbled away from the mayhem. My head was spinning. How had our fun trip devolved into this? In that moment, all I wanted was to get away from these people I thought were my friends. Without really thinking it through, I grabbed a flashlight and my phone and took off into the woods. I could hear shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. I just ran, branches whipping my face in the darkness. After what felt like an hour of running and walking, the adrenaline started to wear off. I realized I had no idea where I was or how to get back to the campsite. My phone had no signal. Panic started to set in as I grasped the gravity of my situation, lost in the wilderness in the middle of the night. I tried to retrace my steps, but every tree looked the same in the beam of my flashlight. The forest seemed to close in around me, shadows playing tricks on my eyes. Was that movement in the bushes, or just the wind? That's when I heard it, a twig snapping loudly behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out shakily. "Guys, is that you?" No response, just an eerie silence that felt thick and oppressive. I started walking faster, constantly looking over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Sweat trickled down my back despite the cool night air. Another snap, closer this time. I broke into a run, no longer caring about finding my way back. Pure survival instinct took over as I crashed through the underbrush. In my panic, I failed to watch where I was going. My foot caught on a root, and I went sprawling, tumbling down a steep embankment. Pain shot through my ankle as I came to a stop at the bottom. Groaning, I tried to stand but collapsed when I put weight on my injured leg. I was in trouble, stranded, possibly being stalked by some unknown predator, human or animal. I crawled to the base of a large tree, pressing my back against it. Tears streamed down my face as the hopelessness of my situation sank in. I was going to die out here, all because of a stupid drunken fight. That's when I saw it, a dark figure standing motionless about 20 yards away. My blood ran cold. It was too tall and thin to be a bear or other animal. This was a person. But who? And why were they just standing there watching me? Hello? I called out, voice quavering. Please, I need help. The figure didn't move or respond. It just stood there, a black silhouette against the trees. Shaking, I raised my flashlight. But in that split second between darkness and illumination, the figure vanished. I blinked in confusion. Had I imagined it? I swept the flashlight beam around frantically, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just trees and shadows. A twig snapped directly behind the tree I was leaning against. I scrambled away on hands and knees, ignoring the pain shooting up my leg. Heart hammering in my chest, I spun around. And there it was again, the dark figure, standing mere feet away. I caught a glimpse of pale skin and hollow eyes before I screamed and covered my face. When I lowered my hands, it was gone, vanished into thin air. I curled into a ball, sobbing uncontrollably. This couldn't be real. I must be hallucinating from fear and exhaustion. But it had seemed so vivid, so terrifyingly present. The rest of the night passed in a haze of paralyzing fear. Every snapping twig or rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. I kept catching glimpses of that tall, thin figure out of the corner of my eye. But whenever I looked directly, there was nothing there. As the sky began to lighten with the first rays of dawn, I heard something that made me weep with relief. Voices calling my name in the distance. "I'm here!" I shouted hoarsely. "Help! I'm over here!" Within minutes, a search and rescue team found me huddled at the base of the tree. They told me my friends had called for help when I didn't return to the campsite. As they loaded me into a stretcher, I babbled about the dark figure that had stalked me all night. The rescue workers exchanged worried glances, clearly thinking I was delirious. Maybe I was. Maybe the isolation and fear had caused me to hallucinate. But even now, weeks later, I can't shake the feeling that what I saw was real, that something inhuman was out there in those woods, watching and waiting. I later learned that my friend's fight had escalated after I ran off. The police were called and Jake ended up arrested for assault. The others all went their separate ways, our friend group shattered beyond repair. I'm still grappling with the trauma of that night. I have nightmares about those hollow eyes staring at me from the darkness. I can't be alone in the woods anymore without panicking. Part of me wants to go back, to prove to myself that it was all in my head. But a bigger part is terrified of what I might find if I return to those woods. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. I don't know if I'll ever fully recover from what happened on that camping trip. The betrayal of my friends, the terror of being lost and hunted in the wilderness. It's left deep scars, both physical and emotional. All I know is that I'll never take my safety for granted again. And I'll think twice before heading into the great outdoors, where ancient, inexplicable things may still lurk in the shadows, waiting for unwary travelers to stumble into their domain. I was so excited for our family vacation to my parents' cabin near Lake Obsidian. As a software engineer, I rarely get extended time off, so a full week away with my wife Catherine and our kids felt like a real luxury. The drive up was filled with the usual road trip antics, sing-alongs, silly car games, and the occasional "Are we there yet?" from the back seat. When we finally arrived at the cabin, I felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me. So many childhood summers spent exploring these woods, fishing in the lake, and roasting marshmallows around the campfire. I couldn't wait to share those experiences with my own kids. The first couple days were idyllic. We hiked some of my favorite trails, went canoeing on the mirror-like surface of the lake, and stayed up late playing board games by lantern light. On the third night, things took a turn I still struggle to explain. It started with strange noises outside the cabin after dark. At first I dismissed them as typical forest sounds, maybe a raccoon or deer rustling around. But there was something off about the rhythm, almost like footsteps, but not quite right. Too irregular, too deliberate. I tried to shake off my unease, telling myself I was just on edge from too many scary movies. But when I glanced out the window, I saw a shadowy figure dart between the trees. My heart leapt into my throat. It was roughly human-shaped, but moved in a jerky, unnatural way. I blinked hard, certain I must be seeing things. When I looked again, the woods were still. I decided not to mention it to Catherine or the kids, not wanting to spook them over what was probably just my overactive imagination. The next morning, my daughter Emma was acting strangely at breakfast. She was usually our little chatterbox, but that day she was eerily quiet, staring blankly ahead as she robotically spooned cereal into her mouth. When I asked if she was feeling okay, she turned to me with an unnervingly wide smile and said, "I'm just fine, Daddy," in a voice that didn't quite sound like hers. A chill ran down my spine, but I told myself she was probably just tired or coming down with something. We had a quiet day around the cabin, and by dinner Emma seemed back to her usual self. I started to relax, figuring the weirdness was behind us. That night I woke suddenly, every nerve in my body on high alert. The cabin was dead silent. No creaking floorboards, no wind in the trees, not even the sound of breathing from my sleeping family. The silence felt oppressive, unnatural. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw a figure standing at the foot of our bed. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it was Emma. But something was horribly wrong. Her limbs were impossibly long and thin, stretching and undulating like tentacles. Her head was cocked at an unnatural angle, and when she smiled, her mouth opened far wider than any human mouth should. I tried to cry out, to wake Catherine, but no sound came out. The thing that looked like Emma but couldn't possibly be her glided closer, moving in a way no human body could move. As it reached out with those grotesquely elongated fingers, I squeezed my eyes shut and silently screamed. When I opened them again, sunlight was streaming through the windows, and Catherine was shaking me awake, asking if I'd had a nightmare. I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. It had felt so real, so viscerally terrifying. But it must have been a dream, right? Throughout the day, I kept catching glimpses of things that weren't quite right. Emma's shadow seemed to move independently of her. Objects would be in different places than where I'd left them. At one point, I could have sworn I saw two versions of my son Michael running past the window. But when I looked again, he was sitting quietly reading on the couch. I tried to rationalize it all away, but a deep sense of wrongness had settled over me. That night, I insisted we all sleep in the living room together, claiming I wanted to have a family slumber party. The truth was, I was terrified of what might happen if we were separated. In the middle of the night, I jolted awake to see Emma standing in the center of the room, but this time I wasn't the only one who saw her. Catherine gasped beside me, and I heard Michael whimper. The thing wearing Emma's face turned to us with that too wide smile. In a voice that was Emma's but somehow not, it said, "Why don't you want to play with me? I just want to be part of the family." As we watched in horror, Its limbs began to stretch and twist, its features melting and reforming. One moment it looked like Emma, then Catherine, then me, cycling through our faces like a nightmarish slideshow. Catherine clutched my arm so hard it hurt, whispering, "James, what's happening? Where's the real Emma?" With a jolt, I realized the real Emma was still asleep on the floor beside us. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't her. It wasn't any of us. The creature let out a sound that was part laugh, part shriek. "Oh, you've figured it out, but that doesn't mean the game is over. I can be anyone, or anything." It lunged towards us, its form shifting and warping. I threw myself in front of my family, desperately trying to think of a way to fight this impossible thing. Suddenly, a small voice piped up behind me. It was the real Emma, awake now and staring defiantly at her doppelganger. "You're not real," she said firmly. "You're just a bad dream, and I don't believe in you." The creature faltered, its form flickering like a bad TV signal. Michael joined in, his voice shaky but determined. Yeah, you're not real, and you can't hurt us." I felt a surge of pride and love for my brave kids. Following their lead, I stood tall and declared, "We reject you. You have no power here. This is our family, and you are not welcome." Catherine squeezed my hand and added her voice to ours. United, we faced down the creature, repeating over and over that we didn't believe in it, that it had no place in our world. The thing let out an unearthly howl of frustration. Its form began to unravel, stretching and tearing like mist in the wind. With a final inhuman shriek, it dissolved into nothingness. We stood there in shocked silence for a long moment before collapsing into a group hug, all of us shaking and crying with relief. None of us could quite believe what had just happened, but we knew it was real. We'd faced something impossible together and come out the other side. The rest of our vacation passed without incident, but we were all on edge, jumping at shadows and staying close together. When it was time to leave, we practically ran to the car, eager to put as much distance between us and that cabin as possible. In the years since, we've tried to make sense of what happened that night. Was it some kind of shared hallucination, a manifestation of our deepest fears, or something truly supernatural that defies explanation? We may never know for sure. What I do know is this: whatever that thing was, it couldn't stand against the strength of our family bond. In our darkest moment, we found the courage to stand together and face down the impossible. And in doing so, we emerged stronger than ever. I still have nightmares sometimes, of impossibly long limbs and faces that aren't quite right. But when I wake up in a cold sweat, I remind myself that it's over. We faced our fears, and we won. Whatever that entity was, it has no power over us anymore. If you're reading this and thinking it sounds too crazy to be true, I don't blame you. There are days I have a hard time believing it myself, but I know what I saw, what my family experienced, and I know that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. So the next time you're in a dark and quiet place and you feel that prickle on the back of your neck, like something's watching you, remember this story, and remember that sometimes the greatest weapon against the darkness is simply refusing to believe in it. The first few weeks were pretty standard: canoeing, archery, campfire songs. But there was always this underlying tension I couldn't quite put my finger on. The other counselors seemed on edge, especially the ones who'd worked there before. They'd exchange these worried glances whenever a kid wandered too close to the woods surrounding the camp. It wasn't until about a month in that things started to get weird. I was leading a hike with my group when I noticed strange markings carved into some of the trees. They looked old, like they'd been there for decades, crude stick figures, and what looked like tally marks. I brushed it off as some old camper graffiti, but it gave me the creeps. That night at dinner, I mentioned it to Todd, another counselor. He got real quiet and told me to forget about it. Said some things were better left alone, but I could see the fear in his eyes. That's when he finally opened up about the camp's dark history. Turns out, Camp Willow Creek had a reputation. Kids had gone missing over the years, not often, maybe one every few summers, but enough to raise suspicions. The official story was always animal attacks or kids getting lost in the woods, but the locals knew better. There were whispers of something sinister living in those trees. I didn't want to believe it. Thought it was just campfire stories to scare the newbies. But then Jeremy disappeared. Jeremy was this bright-eyed 10-year-old in my group. Smart kid, always asking questions about nature and wildlife. One afternoon during free time, he wandered off towards the edge of camp. We searched for hours, but as night fell, there was still no sign of him. The police came, search parties combed the woods, but deep down, we all knew Jeremy wasn't coming back. 3 days later, they found his body. I won't go into details, but it was bad, real bad. The official report said bear attack, but I saw the body. Those weren't animal marks. The camp director wanted to keep things quiet, send the kids home and sweep it under the rug. But I couldn't let it go. Neither could Todd. We started digging, asking questions the locals didn't want to answer. Late one night, we broke into the camp office, dug through old files, incident reports going back decades. The pieces started coming together, and it was worse than we could have imagined. The land Camp Willow Creek sat on used to belong to the Holbrook family. They'd owned it for generations before selling to developers in the 60s. But they never really left. Frank Holbrook was the last of the line. His family had been picking off campers for years, seeing them as trespassers on their ancestral land. It was sick, a twisted family tradition passed down through the generations. We took what we found to the sheriff, but he brushed us off, said we were chasing ghost stories. That's when we realized how deep this went. The locals knew. They'd always known. But the camp brought in money, kept the town alive, so they looked the other way. Todd and I knew we had to do something. We couldn't let more kids die, so we set up our own stakeout, watching the woods at night after the campers were asleep. For days, nothing. Then, on the 5th night, we saw him. A figure moving through the trees, watching the cabins. We followed at a distance, deeper into the woods than I'd ever been before. After about an hour, we came to a clearing. There was a cabin there, old and run down. As we got closer, the smell hit us. Death, decay, years of it. We should have gone back, called for help. But we were stupid, thought we could be heroes. We burst in, flashlights blazing. What we saw inside that cabin will haunt me until the day I die. Trophies, dozens of them, clothing, toys, photos, mementos taken from every victim over the years, and Frank Holbrook sitting in the middle of it all like some twisted king. The fight was brutal. Frank was strong, fueled by generations of hatred. But there were 2 of us, and in the end, we managed to subdue him. The aftermath was a blur. Police, FBI, media circus. The full extent of the Holbrook family's crimes came to light. Dozens of murders over nearly 50 years. Camp Willow Creek shut down, of course. The land was seized by the state and turned into a nature preserve. No one goes there anymore. Too many bad memories. I left Montana after that summer, tried to put it all behind me. But the nightmares never really stopped. I still see Jeremy's face, still hear Frank Holbrook's crazed ramblings about protecting his family's legacy. Sometimes I wonder if we really got them all. If there isn't another Holbrook out there, waiting to continue the family tradition. I tell myself it's over, that justice was served. But on dark nights, when the wind blows just right, I can almost hear the whispers from those Montana woods, and I know that some evils never truly die. We drove out to a remote forest area about 3 hours from Birmingham. The spot Travis picked was pretty secluded, no other campers or hikers around for miles. As we set up our tents, I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. The forest felt oppressive somehow, like the trees were watching us. That first night around the campfire, Travis started telling spooky stories. He mentioned something called a Wendigo, some kind of Native American spirit that possesses humans and turns them into cannibals. I rolled my eyes, thinking it was just another dumb urban legend. If only I'd known. We turned in early, planning to go hiking the next day. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. As I was walking back to the tent, I heard this weird sound, like a cross between a screech and a howl. It echoed through the trees, raising goosebumps on my arms. I told myself it was just an owl or something and tried to go back to sleep. The next morning, we packed some supplies and set off on our hike. Everything seemed normal at first, but after about an hour, I started noticing weird things. Claw marks gouged deep into tree trunks, piles of gnawed bones that looked disturbingly human, an overpowering stench of decay that seemed to follow us. I tried to point these things out to the others, but they didn't seem to notice. It was like I was the only one who could see the signs. I was starting to seriously freak out. Then we found the tracks, huge misshapen footprints pressed into the mud. They were easily twice the size of a normal human foot, with long claw marks at the ends of the toes, and they were fresh. "Guys, we need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. "Something's not right." Travis laughed it off. "Come on, man, it's probably just a bear or something." But I knew better. No bear made tracks like that. We kept hiking, but now there was a palpable tension in the air. Even the others seemed on edge. The forest had gone eerily quiet. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, just dead silence. That's when we heard the truck. The roar of an engine shattered the stillness, getting louder by the second. But that was impossible. There were no roads anywhere near us. Suddenly, headlights burst through the trees behind us. A massive black pickup truck came barreling down the hiking trail, moving way too fast for the rough terrain. "Run!" I screamed. We took off, sprinting through the woods. I could hear the truck crashing through the underbrush behind us, gaining ground impossibly fast. The girls were screaming. Travis yelled something about splitting up. I grabbed Jennifer's hand and veered left, while Travis and Sadie went right. The truck hesitated for a moment, then followed us. We ran until our lungs were burning. I pulled Jennifer behind a large tree, praying the truck would pass us by. The engine roared closer and closer, and then silence. The truck had stopped. I risked a peek around the tree. The black pickup was idling about 50 feet away, its headlights cutting through the gloom. But there was no driver. The cab was empty. A twig snapped somewhere to our right. Jennifer whimpered, and I clamped a hand over her mouth. That's when I saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows between the trees. It was vaguely humanoid, but wrong in every way. At least 8 feet tall, with limbs that were far too long and joints that bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was a sickly grayish-white, pulled tight over an emaciated frame. The head was the worst part, an elongated skull, with massive antlers sprouting from the crown. And its face, dear God, its face. Black, empty eye sockets and a mouthful of needle-sharp teeth stretched in a permanent hungry grin. I knew without a doubt I was looking at a Wendigo. The creature Travis had joked about around the campfire was real, and it was hunting us. The Wendigo's head swiveled in our direction, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. I held my breath, praying it wouldn't spot us. For a heart-stopping moment, I was sure we were done for. Then a scream split the air. Sadie's voice. The Wendigo's head snapped towards the sound, and it loped off with terrifying speed, moving on all fours like some kind of demented spider. I grabbed Jennifer's hand. "We have to help them," I said. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. We took off in the direction of the scream, moving as quietly as we could through the underbrush. We found Travis and Sadie in a small clearing. They were backed up against a cliff face, the Wendigo advancing on them slowly. Travis was swinging a large branch like a club, but the creature didn't seem fazed. I looked around desperately for a weapon, anything we could use. My eyes fell on a rusty old oil drum half buried in leaves. I ran over and pried off the lid, gagging at the smell of stagnant gasoline inside. "Hey, ugly!" I yelled, hefting the drum. The Wendigo whirled towards me, letting out an ear-splitting shriek. I hurled the contents of the drum at it, dousing the creature in gasoline. Travis didn't hesitate. He pulled out his lighter and tossed it. The Wendigo went up like a torch, howling and thrashing as flames engulfed its body. The stench of burning flesh was overwhelming. We watched in horror as the creature stumbled around the clearing, still somehow alive despite being on fire. It crashed into trees, leaving trails of flame in its wake. I was terrified it would start a forest fire. Finally, mercifully, the Wendigo collapsed. The flames slowly died down, leaving behind a charred, twitching mass on the forest floor. We approached cautiously, hardly daring to believe it was over. The creature's chest still rose and fell with labored breaths. "We need proof," Travis said, pulling out his phone. "No one will believe us otherwise." He started taking pictures and video of the dying Wendigo. I wanted to tell him to stop, to just let us get the hell out of there. But a small part of me was glad we'd have evidence. Maybe then I wouldn't feel like I was losing my mind. That's when we heard the helicopters. 2 black choppers appeared over the tree line, hovering ominously. Men in tactical gear rappelled down, surrounding us with weapons drawn. "On the ground, hands where we can see them," one of them barked. We complied, too shell-shocked to resist. I watched helplessly as they loaded the Wendigo's body into a capsule and winched it up to one of the helicopters. A man who seemed to be in charge approached us. "You've seen something you weren't supposed to see," he said grimly. "We're going to need you to come with us." They confiscated our phones and camera equipment, then herded us onto the remaining helicopter. As we lifted off, I caught a glimpse of men in hazmat suits swarming over the clearing below, erasing all traces of what had happened. The last thing I remember is a sharp prick in my arm as one of the men injected me with something. Then everything went black. I woke up 3 days later in my own bed, with only hazy memories of what had transpired. When I called the others, they all had the same experience. Missing time and fragmented recollections of our camping trip. But I know what I saw. The image of that Wendigo is seared into my brain. Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, hearing that unearthly howl echoing through my dreams. I don't know who those men were or why they're covering up the existence of these creatures. But I do know one thing. I'm never going camping again. I never thought a simple camping trip could change my life forever, but that's exactly what happened during my solo excursion to Moosehead Lake in the summer of 1984. I was 28 at the time, working a soul-crushing job in advertising in Boston, and desperately needed to get away from the city for a while. Moosehead Lake in Maine seemed like the perfect escape: pristine wilderness, breathtaking scenery, and best of all, total solitude. The first few days were exactly what I needed. I hiked, fished, sat by crackling campfires under starry skies. It was blissfully peaceful. But on the fourth day, everything changed. I decided to explore a new trail that morning, one that wasn't on any of my maps. It snaked deep into a densely wooded area I hadn't ventured into before. The forest seemed to get darker and more oppressive the further I went. An eerie silence fell over everything. No birds chirping, no rustling leaves, just a heavy, watchful quiet that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. After about an hour of hiking, I came to a small clearing, and there, partially hidden by overgrown vines and brush, was a dilapidated wooden cabin. It looked ancient, like it had been there for 100 years or more. Every instinct told me to turn back, but my curiosity got the better of me. I cautiously approached and peered through a grimy window. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. The cabin was filled with bizarre symbols carved into every surface: the walls, floor, ceiling. They looked almost like some kind of hieroglyphics, but none I'd ever seen before. Stranger still were the objects arranged on a crude altar: crystals, candles, and what looked disturbingly like human bones. I stumbled back from the window in shock, my heart pounding. That's when I heard a twig snap behind me. I whirled around to see an old man standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me with piercing blue eyes. He introduced himself as Walter and claimed to be a local who lived nearby. "You shouldn't be here," he said gravely. "These woods hold dark secrets." Despite my better judgment, I found myself drawn into conversation with Walter. He spoke cryptically about the area's history, tales of Native American rituals, European settlers dabbling in the occult, and sinister ceremonies performed deep in the forest. According to Walter, there had long been a struggle between those who sought to harness the supernatural power of the land and those who wanted to keep it contained. The symbols you saw in that cabin, they're containment sigils, Walter explained, meant to keep something locked away, but lately the barriers have been weakening. I listened with growing unease, unsure whether to believe his fantastical claims. But something in Walter's haunted expression told me he wasn't spinning tall tales. This man had seen things that haunted him. Our conversation was abruptly cut short by the sound of chanting in the distance. Walter's eyes went wide with fear. "They're coming," he hissed. "Run, now!" I didn't need to be told twice. I took off sprinting back down the trail, Walter's warnings echoing in my head. The chanting grew louder, punctuated by inhuman shrieks that chilled me to my core. Branches whipped at my face as I ran blindly through the woods, fueled by pure adrenaline and terror. I don't know how long I ran for, but eventually I burst out of the tree line onto a dirt road. An old pickup truck was idling nearby, an elderly couple inside looking at me with concern. I must have looked like a madman, wild-eyed, covered in scratches, gasping for breath. "Please," I managed to choke out. "I need help." The couple, Frank and Martha, didn't ask questions. They simply opened the door and told me to get in. As we sped away, I glanced in the rear-view mirror and saw dark-robed figures emerging from the woods. Their faces were hidden, but I could feel their malevolent gazes boring into me. Frank and Martha took me back to their farmhouse, where I spent the night trying to make sense of what had happened. They seemed unsurprised by my story, exchanging knowing glances as I recounted my experience. "We've lived here for 50 years, Martha said softly. "Seen a lot of strange things in these woods. Most folks around here know to leave well enough alone." The next morning they drove me to the nearest bus station so I could get back to Boston. As I boarded the bus, Martha pressed a small cloth bag into my hand. "For protection," she whispered. Inside was an assortment of herbs and what looked like a crudely carved wooden charm. I've spent the last 39 years trying to rationalize what happened that day at Moosehead Lake. I've read countless books on local folklore, delved into occult studies, even consulted psychics. But I've never found a satisfactory explanation for what I experienced. Sometimes I wonder if it was all just an elaborate hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. But then I'll catch a glimpse of a hooded figure in a crowd, or wake up in a cold sweat with those strange symbols dancing behind my eyelids, and I know in my bones that what I encountered was real. I've never been back to Moosehead Lake. I can't bring myself to return, even after all these years. The trauma of that day left an indelible mark on my psyche. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. I've never been able to shake the feeling that I've been changed by what I saw, marked somehow by the dark forces in those woods. I still keep Martha's protective charm with me at all times. Whether it actually does anything or is just a placebo, I don't know. But it's a tangible reminder that I'm not crazy, that what I experienced was real. I often wonder about Walter and about the hooded figures who chased me. Are they still out there performing their arcane rituals? Has whatever was contained in that cabin broken free? I may never know the answers. All I know is that my encounter at Moosehead Lake opened my eyes to a hidden world, a world of ancient powers and terrifying secrets lurking just beneath the surface of our reality. It's a knowledge I can never unlearn, a burden I'll carry for the rest of my days. So if you're ever camping in the wilderness of Maine, and you come across an old cabin filled with strange symbols, run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Some secrets are better left buried in the dark heart of the forest. There were 5 of us, myself, Jake, Melissa, Chris, and Emma. We'd been planning this trip for months, poring over maps and stocking up on supplies. The plan was to spend a week hiking and camping in some of the more remote areas of the desert, far from the usual tourist trails. We wanted to really immerse ourselves in the wild beauty of the landscape. The first couple days went pretty much as expected. We hiked during the cooler morning and evening hours, resting in whatever shade we could find during the scorching midday heat. The scenery was breathtaking, endless vistas of red rocks and sand dunes, punctuated by the occasional hardy desert plant. At night, the sky came alive with more stars than I'd ever seen before. It was on the 3rd night that things started to get weird. We'd set up camp in a small canyon, the towering rock walls providing some shelter from the wind. As we sat around the campfire after dinner, swapping stories and sipping whiskey, I noticed a strange flickering light on the canyon wall behind Jake. At first I thought it was just shadows from our fire, but it seemed to be moving independently, almost like it was alive. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, figuring I was just tired or the whiskey was going to my head. But when I looked again, the light was still there, pulsing and shifting in mesmerizing patterns. "Hey guys," I said hesitantly, "do you see that light on the wall over there?" The others turned to look, but their reactions weren't what I expected. Instead of surprise or curiosity, they just seemed confused. "What light?" Melissa asked, squinting at the spot I was pointing to. "I don't see anything unusual." A chill ran down my spine. How could they not see it? The light was so vivid and strange, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. I tried to explain what I was seeing, but the more I talked, the more baffled and concerned my friends looked. Eventually, Jake suggested I get some sleep, saying the heat and exertion must be getting to me. I reluctantly agreed, crawling into my tent with a deep sense of unease. As I lay there in the darkness, I could still see flashes of that strange light pulsing behind my closed eyelids. Sleep was a long time coming that night. The next morning, I woke feeling groggy and disoriented. The others were already up, packing up the campsite. I hoped that in the light of day, the strange events of the night before would seem like nothing more than an odd dream. But as we hiked that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The landscape seemed to shift and change in ways that defied logic. Rock formations that I could have sworn weren't there before would suddenly loom on the horizon. At one point, I saw what looked like a shimmering oasis in the distance, complete with palm trees and a sparkling pool of water. But when I pointed it out to the others, they just gave me strange looks and said they didn't see anything but more desert. As the day wore on, my sense of reality continued to unravel. The very air around me seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. I started seeing flashes of movement out of the corner of my eye, darting shapes that vanished when I tried to focus on them. The worst part was that none of my friends seemed to notice anything unusual. They hiked on, chatting and laughing as if everything was normal. By the time we made camp that evening, I was a nervous wreck. I tried to act normal, not wanting the others to think I was losing my mind. But inside, I was in turmoil. What was happening to me? Was I hallucinating, going crazy, or was I somehow perceiving things that others couldn't? As night fell, things got even stranger. The stars overhead seemed to pulse and swirl in impossible patterns. I could hear whispers on the wind, speaking in languages I'd never heard before, but somehow understood on a primal level. And then I saw them, the creatures. They emerged from the darkness beyond our campfire, moving with an otherworldly grace. They were vaguely humanoid in shape, but their bodies seemed to be made of shifting sand and starlight. Their eyes glowed with an inner fire, and when they looked at me, I felt like they were peering into my very soul. I let out a strangled cry, scrambling backwards. The others jumped up in alarm, but once again, they couldn't see what I was seeing. To them, there was nothing there but empty desert. "What's wrong?" Emma asked, her voice filled with concern. "What do you see?" I tried to explain, my words tumbling out in a panicked jumble. I described the creatures, the impossible things I'd been seeing all day. I begged them to believe me, to tell me I wasn't going insane. For a long moment, there was silence. Then Chris spoke up, his voice gentle but firm. "I think we need to get you out of here," he said. "You're not well. Maybe it's heat exhaustion or dehydration, but something's clearly not right." Part of me wanted to argue, to insist that what I was seeing was real, but another part was terrified, desperate for an explanation that made sense. I let them lead me back to my tent, gulping down water and energy bars as they fussed over me. But even as I lay there, trying to calm my racing heart, I could still see the creatures. They hovered at the edges of the campsite, watching me with those burning eyes. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for morning to come. The next day, we cut our trip short and headed back to civilization. My friends were clearly worried about me, treating me like I was made of glass. I played along, pretending that I felt better and that the hallucinations had stopped. But the truth was, they hadn't. If anything, they'd gotten more intense. As we drove back towards Phoenix, I saw impossible things out the car window. Cities made of crystal rising from the desert floor, then vanishing in the blink of an eye. Massive creatures that looked like a cross between dinosaurs and birds soaring through the sky. And always, always, those sand and starlight beings watching me from just out of sight. It's been months since that trip, and I still don't know what to make of what happened. I've seen doctors, had brain scans, been tested for every condition under the sun. Physically, they say I'm perfectly healthy, but I know I'm not the same person I was before that desert trip. The visions have faded somewhat since returning to the city, but they haven't gone away entirely. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'll catch a glimpse of one of those creatures. In my dreams, I return to that desert night, surrounded by whispers and starlight. I don't know if what I experienced was real in any conventional sense. Maybe I did have some kind of mental breakout there in the desert heat. But deep down, I can't shake the feeling that I glimpsed something that day. Something beyond our normal understanding of reality. Something ancient and alien and infinitely mysterious. I haven't told anyone else about what I saw. How could I? They'd think I was crazy. Hell, sometimes I think I'm crazy. But I know what I experienced, even if I can't explain it. And I can't help but wonder, what else is out there, just beyond the edge of what we can perceive? What other realities might be brushing up against our own, invisible to most, but occasionally revealing themselves to a lucky or unlucky few? I don't have any answers. All I know is that my view of the world has been forever changed by what I saw in the Arizona desert. And sometimes, late at night when the city is quiet, I find myself longing to go back, to step once more into that realm of mystery and wonder, no matter how terrifying it might be. Because now that I've glimpsed what's behind the veil of our reality, I don't think I can ever be satisfied with the mundane world again. I was part of a 6-person research team studying climate change impacts on boreal forests in remote Alaska. We had been planning this expedition for months, meticulously preparing our gear and reviewing safety protocols. Nothing could have prepared us for what we encountered out there. The first few days were uneventful as we hiked deep into the wilderness, setting up camp each night and collecting data during the day. On the 4th night, things took a dark turn. I was jolted awake by blood-curdling screams coming from outside the tents. Heart racing, I scrambled out of my sleeping bag to investigate. The campsite was in chaos. My colleagues were running around in a panic, shouting incoherently. In the dim light of our headlamps, I caught glimpses of massive, shadowy figures darting between the trees at the edge of our camp. They moved with unnatural speed and agility, far too quick and nimble to be bears or any other Alaskan wildlife I was familiar with. Dr. Chen, our lead researcher, was trying to calm everyone down and make sense of the situation. "Everyone stay close. We need to stick together," he yelled, but his voice was shaking with fear. As we huddled together, I noticed with horror that we were only 5. James, our wildlife biologist, was missing. "Where's James?" I shouted. No one knew. Just then we heard James's voice calling out from the forest. "Help! Oh God, help me!" The anguish in his cries chilled me to the bone. Without thinking, I started running towards his voice, my colleagues close behind. We plunged into the dark forest, our headlamps casting eerie shadows as we searched frantically for James. The forest seemed to come alive around us, branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, roots rising up to trip us. I could have sworn I saw eyes glowing in the darkness, watching our every move. Suddenly, James burst out of the underbrush right in front of us. His face was pale as a ghost, eyes wide with terror. "Run! We have to get out of here!" he screamed. We didn't need to be told twice. We sprinted back towards our camp, hearts pounding. I could hear something massive crashing through the forest behind us, gaining ground with every second. The sound of snapping branches and an otherworldly howl filled the air. We reached the campsite and quickly grabbed what essential gear we could. There was no time to break down the tents or pack properly. We had to get out of there immediately. As we fled into the night, I glanced back one last time. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my days. Towering, shadowy figures stood at the edge of our abandoned camp. They were vaguely humanoid but impossibly tall and thin, with limbs that seemed too long for their bodies. And their eyes, God, their eyes glowed with an unnatural piercing light that seemed to bore right into my soul. We ran for what felt like hours, stumbling through the dark forest, driven by pure adrenaline and fear. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, the reality of our situation began to sink in. We were lost in the Alaskan wilderness, miles from civilization, with minimal supplies and no way to call for help. As the sun began to rise, we took stock of our situation. We had 3 days' worth of emergency rations, a first aid kit, 2 satellite phones, both dead, their batteries inexplicably drained, and the clothes on our backs. Our scientific equipment, most of our food and water, and our camping gear were all left behind in our frantic escape. Dr. Chen tried to use his GPS to get our bearings, but it was malfunctioning, showing impossible coordinates that seemed to change every time he looked at it. We were well and truly lost. We decided our best bet was to try to find our way back to the research station where we had started our expedition. It was about a week's hike from our original campsite, but without knowing exactly where we were, it could take much longer. As we hiked, an oppressive silence settled over the forest. There were no bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just an eerie stillness that set my nerves on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, hunted. James was in rough shape. Whatever he had seen out there in the forest had left him shell-shocked. He kept muttering to himself, jumping at every sound. When we tried to get him to tell us what happened, he just shook his head and said, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." As night fell, we reluctantly made camp, using what little gear we had to create a makeshift shelter. No one wanted to sleep, but exhaustion eventually overcame fear, and we took turns keeping watch. I had just dozed off when I was awakened by a blood-curdling scream. It was Lisa, our botanist, who had been on watch. She was pointing at something just beyond the light of our small fire, her face a mask of terror. I followed her gaze and felt my blood run cold. Standing at the edge of the darkness was one of the creatures we had seen the night before. It was even more terrifying up close, easily 9 feet tall, with skin that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its face was featureless except for those glowing eyes, fixed unblinkingly on us. We all scrambled to our feet, huddling together in terror. The creature took a step forward, its movements unnaturally fluid. Then another step. It was toying with us, savoring our fear. Suddenly, Dr. Chen sprang into action. He grabbed a burning branch from our fire and charged at the creature, yelling at the top of his lungs. The rest of us snapped out of our paralysis and followed suit, grabbing whatever we could use as weapons. To our amazement, the creature retreated, melting back into the darkness of the forest. We didn't wait to see if it would return. We grabbed what we could and started running again, our exhaustion forgotten in the face of this new terror. As we fled through the night, more of the creatures appeared, always just at the edge of our vision. They herded us, driving us deeper into the forest, away from any hope of rescue. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out, finally collapsing in a small clearing as dawn broke. The next few days passed in a blur of fear and exhaustion. We pushed ourselves to keep moving during the day, trying to find our way out of the forest. But no matter which direction we went, we always seemed to end up back in the same areas. It was as if the forest itself was changing around us, trapping us in an endless maze. At night the creatures would return. Sometimes we would only catch glimpses of them, their glowing eyes watching us from the darkness. Other times they would come right to the edge of our camp, standing silently, waiting. We took turns keeping watch, but it was useless. None of us could sleep knowing those things were out there. Our food ran out quickly. We resorted to foraging, but even that was strange. The berries we found were oddly colored and tasted wrong. The water from streams left us feeling dizzy and disoriented. It was as if everything in this forest was tainted by some malevolent force. On what I think was our 5th day lost in the forest, things took an even darker turn. We woke to find James missing. His sleeping bag was empty, with no signs of a struggle. We searched the area, calling his name, but there was no trace of him. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. The loss of James hit us hard. The reality of our situation came crashing down. We were going to die out here, picked off one by whatever ungodly things lurked in this forest. Morale plummeted. Lisa hadn't spoken in days, lost in her own world of terror. Dr. Chen's confident leadership had crumbled, leaving him a shell of his former self. As for me, I was running on autopilot, my mind refusing to process the horrors we had witnessed. I focused solely on putting one foot in front of the other, clinging to the irrational hope that if we just kept moving, we'd eventually find our way out. On what I believe was our 7th day in the forest, we made a horrifying discovery. We stumbled upon an old, decrepit cabin in a small clearing. Hope surged through us. Maybe this was a ranger station, or at least somewhere we could find supplies and shelter. But as we approached, we realized something was terribly wrong. The cabin looked ancient, far older than it should be in a forest that had been largely unexplored until recent decades. The wood was rotted and covered in a strange phosphorescent fungus that pulsed with an inner light. Despite our misgivings, we were desperate for shelter. As we cautiously entered the cabin, the stench of decay assaulted us, and there in the center of the single room was a sight that nearly stopped my heart. It was James, or what was left of him. His body was slumped in a chair, partially mummified, as if he had been there for years rather than days. But the truly horrifying part was his face, frozen in a rictus of terror, his eyes wide and staring at something none of us could see. Lisa broke down completely at this point, curling into a fetal position and sobbing uncontrollably. Dr. Chen vomited in the corner. I stood there, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. That's when I noticed the writing on the walls. Scrawled in what looked disturbingly like dried blood were phrases in dozens of languages. I recognized some English among them. They're always watching. The forest is alive. No escape. We fled from that cabin of horrors, running blindly through the forest. The creatures appeared again, herding us, always staying just out of reach. We ran until we collapsed from exhaustion, our minds broken by what we had seen. I don't know how much time passed after that. Days blurred together in a haze of terror and exhaustion. We lost Lisa next. One moment she was there and the next she was gone, as if the forest had simply swallowed her whole. It was down to just me and Dr. Chen now. We barely spoke, save for the occasional whimper of fear when we heard something moving in the underbrush or caught a glimpse of glowing eyes in the darkness. And then, just as suddenly as our ordeal had begun, it ended. We stumbled out of the forest onto a logging road. A truck driver found us, delirious, and on the brink of death from dehydration and starvation. The authorities searched the area where we said we had been lost, but found no trace of our missing colleagues or the horrors we described. They put our stories down to hallucinations brought on by our ordeal. But I know what I saw. Those creatures were real. The cabin was real. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still see those glowing eyes watching me from the shadows, waiting to pull me back into that nightmare forest. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, most days I'm not sure I believe it myself. But I know one thing for certain. I'll never set foot in another forest as long as I live. Some places are not meant for human eyes, and some things are better left undiscovered. I've been a fisherman all my life, just like my father and grandfather before me. Our family has lived on the coast of New England for generations, making our living from the sea. But nothing in all those years could have prepared me for what happened last summer. It was early June when my wife Lisa, our 2 kids and I headed out to our family's old fishing cabin on a remote stretch of coastline. We go there every year for the start of lobster season. The cabin's been in our family for over a century, a weathered old place perched on the rocky shore, with the vast Atlantic stretching out as far as the eye can see. The first few days were normal enough. I'd go out in the boat before dawn to check the lobster traps, coming back mid-morning with the day's catch. Lisa and the kids would explore the tide pools or go hiking in the pine forests that came right down to the shore. Nights were spent playing cards by lantern light or sitting out on the porch listening to the waves. But on the 4th day, things started to feel off. I can't explain it exactly, just a creeping sense of wrongness. The air felt heavier somehow, the usual sounds of gulls and surf muted and distant. Even the familiar rhythm of the tides seemed altered. That morning when I went to check the traps, nearly all of them were empty. Not just free of lobsters, but completely bare. No bait, no seaweed, nothing. It was as if they'd been scrubbed clean. The few that did have anything in them contained, well, I'm not sure what they were. Writhing masses of tentacles and eyes, creatures I'd never seen before in all my years on the water. I dumped them back overboard as fast as I could. When I got back to shore, Lisa was waiting with a worried look. "Did you hear that sound last night?" she asked. I hadn't, but she described a low, pulsing hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It had gone on for hours, keeping her awake. That night I heard it too. A deep thrumming noise, felt as much as heard, that set my teeth on edge. The kids were restless, tossing and turning in their bunks. Even our old dog whined and paced. Outside, an unnatural fog had rolled in, so thick I couldn't see past the porch railing. The next morning, the fog still hadn't lifted. I decided to stay close to shore, just checking the nearest traps. As I motored out, shapes seemed to move in the mist, just at the edge of vision. More than once I could have sworn I saw massive serpentine forms undulating beneath the waves. The traps were worse than before. Some were crushed and mangled as if by enormous force. Others contained things, pallid, bulbous creatures that looked like they belonged in the deepest trenches, not in the familiar coastal waters. One trap held what looked like a human hand, webbed and scaled, that twitched when I lifted the cage. I dropped it and raced back to shore. Lisa was frantic when I returned. She'd taken the kids down to their favorite tide pool, only to find it filled with a thick, oily substance that seemed to move of its own accord. Worse, she'd seen tracks in the sand, huge clawed prints that started at the water's edge and led into the woods behind our cabin. That night, none of us could sleep. The humming was back, louder than ever. It seemed to resonate in our bones, making us nauseous and disoriented. The fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. Shadows moved across the walls, cast by no discernible source. Just before dawn, a scream split the air, a sound no human throat could make. It went on and on, ululating and inhuman. The kids began to cry. Lisa clutched them close as I grabbed my old shotgun, though I knew in my gut it would be useless against whatever was out there. Suddenly, the cabin began to shake. At first, I thought it was an earthquake, but then I realized the building was being lifted. Water began to seep in under the door as the entire structure was pulled towards the sea. In desperation, I flung open the door. What I saw defies description. Vast tentacles, glowing with bioluminescence, had wrapped around our cabin. They were attached to something rising from the waves. All I could make out was an enormous mass, bigger than a whale, with countless eyes reflecting the dim light. I fired the shotgun, more out of panic than any real hope. The thing recoiled, dropping us back onto the shore with a crash. As it slid back beneath the waves, I caught a glimpse of a gaping maw lined with teeth the size of boat anchors. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. We piled into the car and fled, leaving everything behind. As we raced down the coastal road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The fog was receding, and for just a moment I saw our cabin silhouetted against the lightening sky. Then a massive tentacle rose up, wrapped around the building, and dragged it into the sea. We drove straight through to my sister's place inland, not stopping until we were miles from the coast. We never went back to that stretch of shore. I sold my boat and took a job at a factory in town. Some nights I still wake up hearing that alien hum, the sound of something vast and unknowable rising from the depths. I don't know what it was we encountered that summer. Some prehistoric creature awakened from the deep, an alien entity, or something even stranger. All I know is that the sea holds secrets far darker and more terrifying than I ever imagined. And sometimes when the wind is right, I swear I can still smell salt air and rotting seaweed. A reminder that the boundary between our world and the unknown is far thinner than we'd like to believe. We arrived just before dusk, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the dilapidated wooden buildings. An eerie silence hung in the air. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of a breeze. It felt like the whole place was holding its breath. As we unloaded our equipment, I couldn't shake an overwhelming sense of unease. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had the distinct feeling we were being watched. I tried to rationalize it as nerves or my imagination running wild, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. We split up to cover more ground, keeping in radio contact. I headed towards what looked like it had once been the town saloon. The floorboards creaked ominously under my feet as I entered, dust motes swirling in the beam of my flashlight. I set up an EVP recorder and electromagnetic field detector, then settled in to see if I could make contact with any lingering spirits. At first, all was quiet, but after about 20 minutes, I heard what sounded like whispers coming from the far corner of the room. I called out, asking if anyone was there. The whispers grew louder, but I still couldn't make out any words. My EMF detector started going crazy, the needle swinging wildly. Suddenly, I felt an icy cold hand grip my shoulder. I spun around, but there was nothing there. My heart was racing as I radioed the rest of the team. No one answered. That's when things got really weird. The room started to shift and change before my eyes. The decrepit bar transformed into a gleaming mahogany counter, complete with shining brass fixtures. Shadowy figures appeared, engaged in lively conversation. I could smell whiskey and cigar smoke. It was like I had been transported back in time to when the saloon was in its heyday. I stood there in shock, trying to process what I was seeing. One of the spectral patrons turned and looked right at me, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. He raised his glass in a mocking toast, then everything went dark. When my vision cleared, the saloon was back to its abandoned state. I fumbled for my radio, desperate to reach my team. Still nothing but static. Fighting down panic, I decided to go look for them. As I stepped outside, I realized the entire town had changed. Where before there had been only ruins, now there were intact buildings with light spilling from the windows. Ghostly figures walked the streets, going about their business as if it were just another day in the Old West. I saw a woman in a long dress sweeping her porch. She looked up at me and screamed, her face contorting in terror. Suddenly all activity ceased, and every spectral inhabitant turned to stare at me. Their eyes were hollow and full of malice. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I had to get away. The spirits gave chase, their angry howls echoing through the night. I could feel icy fingers grasping at my clothes, trying to drag me back. I don't know how long I ran for. Eventually I collapsed, gasping for air. When I looked up, I was on the outskirts of town. The ghost town looked normal again. Just abandoned buildings slowly decaying in the desert. My team found me there a few hours later. They said I had been missing for almost 24 hours. Though to me it felt like only an hour or two had passed. They hadn't experienced anything unusual themselves, and initially didn't believe my wild story. But when we reviewed the footage and audio recordings, we found evidence that couldn't be explained. EVPs of voices speaking in an old frontier dialect, video showing strange orbs of light and fleeting shadowy figures, and most chillingly, a clear image of me standing in the saloon, surrounded by the ghostly patrons I had described. We left that town and never went back. I still have nightmares about those glowing eyes and grasping hands. I don't know if we stumbled upon some kind of paranormal time slip, or if the town itself was haunted by the unquiet spirits of those who lived and died there. All I know is that it fundamentally changed how I view reality, and the thin veil between our world and whatever lies beyond. I've tried to rationalize it, to find some logical explanation, but deep down, I know what I experienced was real. That ghost town showed me that there are things in this world that defy scientific understanding. Hidden pockets where the laws of nature break down and the impossible becomes possible. Sometimes I'm tempted to go back, to try to uncover the truth about what happened there. But then I remember the malevolent energy of those spirits, the way they reached for me with such hunger and rage, and I know that some mysteries are better left unsolved. I still investigate paranormal claims, but now I approach them with a much more open mind. I've seen firsthand that there are forces and entities out there beyond our comprehension. That abandoned town in the desert opened my eyes to a reality I never knew existed. And sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet, I swear I can still hear those ghostly whispers, a reminder that the veil between worlds is thinner than we think, and that we are never truly alone. After a grueling journey by plane, boat, and finally on foot through dense jungle, we arrived at the village on a sweltering afternoon. The tribal elders greeted us warily, but allowed us to set up camp on the outskirts. That first evening, as the sun set and the cacophony of jungle sounds intensified, I felt a growing sense of unease. Something about this place felt off. I tried to shake the feeling as we began our work the next day, observing and carefully documenting the villagers' daily routines. But strange occurrences kept piling up. Objects in our camp would mysteriously move when no one was looking. We'd catch glimpses of shadowy figures darting between the trees, only to find no one there when we investigated. Several times I could have sworn I heard my name being whispered, even when I was alone. On the third night, things took a truly terrifying turn. I was awakened around midnight by an ear-splitting shriek coming from the jungle. Heart pounding, I scrambled out of my tent to find my colleagues also awake and alarmed. Dr. Chen, our team leader, decided we should investigate in case a villager was in trouble. We cautiously made our way into the pitch-black forest, flashlights scanning the foliage. The cries seemed to be coming from all around us, growing louder and more frenzied. Suddenly, my flashlight beam landed on a horrifying sight. A group of villagers engaged in some kind of ritual, their bodies contorted in unnatural positions as they danced around a roaring bonfire. Their eyes were rolled back, showing only whites, and their mouths hung open in endless screams. But the most chilling part was that their feet weren't touching the ground. They were floating several inches in the air. I let out an involuntary gasp, and dozens of pairs of glowing eyes suddenly turned to fix on us. In that moment, pure terror coursed through my body. We turned and ran blindly back towards camp, branches whipping our faces as inhuman shrieks echoed behind us. When we finally burst into the clearing where our tents were, we found them completely ransacked. All of our equipment and supplies were gone. Even more disturbingly, strange symbols had been painted on the tent walls in what looked horribly like blood. Dr. Chen made the decision to abort the expedition immediately. We grabbed what little we could salvage and set off into the jungle, hoping to retrace our steps back to the river where we could hopefully flag down a boat. Those next 18 hours were the longest of my life. We trudged through the oppressive heat, constantly looking over our shoulders and flinching at every snapping twig or rustling leaf. Several times we heard those bone-chilling screams in the distance, spurring us to move faster despite our exhaustion. As night fell again, strange lights began appearing between the trees, weaving and bobbing as if trying to lure us off the path. We huddled together, too afraid to sleep, as unseen things moved in the darkness around us. Just when I thought I couldn't take the fear and fatigue any longer, we stumbled out onto the riverbank as dawn was breaking. By some miracle, a small fishing boat was passing by, and we were able to flag it down. As we sped away downriver, I kept my eyes fixed on the receding shoreline, half expecting to see those glowing eyes watching us from the tree line. It's been 3 months since we returned, and I still have nightmares about what we saw in that village. Dr. Chen and the others have tried to come up with rational explanations. Mass hallucinations brought on by some unknown fungus or plant, elaborate hoaxes by the villagers to scare off outsiders. or simply the consequences of sleep deprivation and culture shock in an unfamiliar environment. But deep down, I know what I saw was real. Those villagers were tapping into something ancient and powerful, something far beyond our modern understanding of the world. I've abandoned my PhD studies, and some nights I'm still afraid to turn off the lights. I don't know if those things we encountered are still out there in the jungle, but I do know that I'll never set foot in the Amazon again as long as I live. Sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I swear I can still hear those otherworldly screams echoing in the distance. And in my darkest moments, I fear that whatever forces we stirred up in that rainforest might have followed us home. I was part of a team of scientists embarking on an expedition deep into the heart of the Amazon rainforest. We were a diverse group, biologists, geologists, anthropologists, all united by our passion for discovery and our desire to unravel the mysteries of this vast, untamed wilderness. As our small chartered plane descended towards the makeshift airstrip carved out of the dense jungle, I felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. This was the culmination of years of planning and preparation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to step into a world beyond our understanding. The heat and humidity hit us like a wall as we disembarked. The air was thick, almost soupy, filled with the cacophony of insects and birds. Our local guides were waiting for us, weathered men with machetes at their hips and wary eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets. We spent that first day setting up our base camp, a collection of tents and equipment that would serve as our home for the next few weeks. As night fell, the forest came alive with a symphony of unfamiliar sounds. Lying in my tent that night, I found it impossible to sleep. Every rustle and call seemed to hold some hidden meaning, some warning that we were trespassers in a realm not meant for us. The next morning, we set out on our first expedition into the jungle. The foliage was so dense that at times it felt like we were wading through a sea of green. Our machete-wielding guides hacked a path for us, but it felt like the forest was constantly trying to swallow us up. It was on the third day that things started to get strange. We were deep in a part of the jungle that, according to our maps and GPS, had never been properly explored. The air felt different here, heavier, more oppressive. And then we saw it, a clearing that shouldn't have been there. In the middle of this perfectly circular clearing stood a stone structure, weathered and covered in vines, but unmistakably man-made. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, not Incan, not Mayan, not matching any known ancient civilization in the region. As we approached, I felt a deep sense of unease. The clearing was deathly quiet, no birds, no insects, not even the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was as if all life avoided this place. Dr. Rodriguez, our lead archaeologist, was the first to touch the structure. As his fingers brushed against the stone, a visible shudder ran through his body. He turned to us, his face pale, and whispered, "It's warm." We spent hours examining the structure, taking samples and photographing every inch. But as the day wore on, a fog began to roll in, thick, unnatural fog that seemed to glow faintly from within. That's when we heard it, a low, pulsing hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It resonated in our chests, making it hard to breathe. And then, in the mist, we saw shapes, vague, shifting forms that defied description. They moved with a fluid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. Panic set in. We ran, stumbling through the undergrowth, the humming growing louder. the shapes in the mist getting closer. I don't know how long we ran, but when we finally stopped, gasping for air, we realized with horror that we were completely lost. Night fell, and with it came a darkness so complete it felt like we'd been swallowed whole. The shapes in the mist were all around us now, just at the edge of visibility, and they were curious. I felt phantom touches on my skin, heard whispers in languages that had never been spoken by human tongues. We huddled together, too terrified to sleep, as the night wore on. The hum never stopped, pulsing in our heads until I thought I'd go mad. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Dawn broke, and we found ourselves back at our camp. Our equipment was untouched, our tent still standing. It was as if we'd never left. But we all knew what we'd seen, what we'd experienced. The local guides were gone. They'd left a note scrawled hastily in Portuguese. "The forest has spoken. You must leave." We spent the next few days in a daze, packing up our equipment and preparing to leave. No one spoke about what had happened. It was as if by not talking about it, we could pretend it wasn't real. As our plane took off, I looked down at the endless expanse of green below us. Somewhere down there was a clearing with a stone structure and things that moved in the mist, things that defied explanation, that challenged everything we thought we knew about the world. I've been back home for months now, but I can't shake the memory of that night in the jungle. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I swear I can still hear that hum, feel those phantom touches on my skin. And I wonder, what did we really encounter out there in the Amazon? What secrets does that ancient forest hold? And more importantly, what have we awakened? I've tried to talk to my colleagues about it, but they all seem reluctant to discuss what happened. Dr. Rodriguez quit his job at the university and moved to a remote village in the Andes. Dr. Chen, our botanist, hasn't returned any of my calls or emails. I've pored over our data, our samples, our photographs, looking for some rational explanation. But the stone structure doesn't match any known architectural style. The plant samples we collected near the clearing show bizarre genetic anomalies. And the recordings we made, when I play them back, all I hear is that low, pulsing hum. I've started having dreams, vivid, terrifying dreams of shapes in the mist, of ancient stones warm to the touch, of whispers in impossible languages. I wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, the taste of the jungle air still in my mouth. I can't help but feel that we stumbled upon something out there in the Amazon. Something old, something powerful, something that was never meant to be discovered. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see those shapes in the mist, waiting, watching. And I wonder, did we really escape, or did we bring something back with us? I don't know if I'll ever have answers, but I do know this. There are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the shadows of our scientific understanding. And out there in the vast, untamed wilderness of the Amazon, something ancient and unknowable is stirring. I'm writing this down because I need someone, anyone, to know what happened. Because I'm afraid that one day I'll wake up and find myself back in that clearing, surrounded by mist and whispers and things that shouldn't exist. If you're reading this, please, be careful. There are places in this world where reality is thin, where the impossible becomes possible. And once you've seen what's on the other side, you can never unsee it. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. I'll never look at the world the same way again. And neither will you if you ever find yourself face to face with the unknown in the heart of the Amazon. The day we set out, there was a palpable excitement in the air. We'd spent months gathering specialized equipment, poring over geological surveys, and training for every contingency we could imagine, or so we thought. As we began our descent into the main entrance, I remember feeling a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The yawning black maw of the cave seemed to swallow us whole. The first few hours were fairly routine. We carefully made our way through narrow passages, rappelled down steep drops, and mapped out our route. But as we pushed deeper into the system, things started to feel off. It's hard to explain, but there was a heaviness to the air, an oppressive silence that seemed to press in on us from all sides. I tried to shake off the feeling, chalking it up to the natural eeriness of being so far underground. About 6 hours in, we came across something that stopped us in our tracks. Carved into the limestone wall of a large chamber were intricate symbols and pictographs, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. They didn't resemble any known Native American or pre-Columbian art styles. The etchings seemed to glow faintly in the beam of our headlamps, pulsing with an inner light that made my skin crawl. As we examined them more closely, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. The symbols seemed to shift and writhe before my eyes, as if alive. I blinked hard and looked away, but the unsettling sensation lingered. My teammate Mike was taking photos and excitedly speculating about their origin, but I couldn't shake my growing unease. We pressed on, discovering more bizarre carvings and inexplicable structures as we went. In one vast cavern, we found what looked like the ruins of an ancient city, crumbling stone edifices with impossible geometries that hurt my eyes to look at directly. How could a civilization have built something like this so deep underground? And why had no one ever found it before? The deeper we went, the more my sense of dread grew. The temperatures began to fluctuate wildly. One moment we'd be shivering in near-freezing air, the next sweating profusely as if next to a furnace. Our equipment started to malfunction, compasses spinning wildly, batteries draining for no reason. We should have turned back then, but scientific curiosity overrode our better judgment. About 12 hours into the expedition, we entered a narrow tunnel that seemed to go on forever. As we squeezed through the tight passage, I began to hear something. At first, I thought it was just the blood rushing in my ears, but it gradually resolved into a faint rhythmic pulsing, like a massive, distant heartbeat. I asked if anyone else heard it, but they just gave me odd looks. The sound grew louder as we continued, until it was all I could focus on. Thump, 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 thump. It reverberated through my entire body. I was on the verge of panic when we finally emerged into a colossal underground chamber. What we saw there defies explanation. Stretching out before us was a vast subterranean sea, its inky black waters lapping at a pebbled shore. But it was what was in the sea that turned my blood to ice. Massive, shadowy shapes moved beneath the surface. Things that should not, could not exist. As my eyes struggled to make sense of their alien geometries, I felt my sanity begin to fray at the edges. Suddenly, a deafening roar shook the cavern. The shapes in the water began to rise, revealing nightmarish forms that hurt to look upon. I screamed, the sound swallowed by the cacophony around us. We turned and ran, our minds unable to process what we'd seen. What followed was a nightmarish scramble back the way we'd come. Passages that had been open before were now blocked. New tunnels appeared where solid rock had been. It was as if the cave itself was alive, shifting around us. We were hopelessly lost, stumbling through the darkness as unseen things skittered and slithered just out of sight. I'm not sure how long we ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that lightless hell. My memories of our frantic flight are a jumbled mess of terror and confusion. Somehow, miraculously, we found our way back to the surface. We emerged into the daylight, blinking and disoriented, to find that nearly 3 days had passed. 3 days that felt like an eternity. In the weeks since, I've struggled to make sense of what happened. We've pored over our photos and data, but they reveal little. Most of our equipment was destroyed or lost in our panicked escape. The few images we salvaged are blurry and distorted, showing only tantalizing glimpses of the impossible things we encountered. My teammates and I have tried to report our findings, but no one believes us. The authorities insist there's no record of any cave system matching our description in the area we explored. Geologists say the formations and structures we claim to have seen are impossible. We've been accused of perpetrating an elaborate hoax, but I know what I saw. In my dreams, I still hear that rhythmic pulsing, still see those shadowy leviathans rising from the subterranean sea. There are things lurking in the dark places of the world that we were never meant to discover. And now that we have, I fear they've become aware of us too. I don't know if I'll ever cave again. The thought of descending into the darkness fills me with paralyzing dread. But a part of me is drawn back to that impossible underworld, driven by a need to understand what we uncovered. Whatever is down there, it challenges everything we thought we knew about our world and our place in it. Sometimes in the dead of night, I swear I can still feel the cave pulsing beneath my feet, calling me back to its depths. And in those moments, I'm terrified that one day I might answer that call. I was part of a 6-person research team stationed at an isolated outpost in the Arctic. We'd been there for months, studying climate patterns and collecting data on the rapidly changing polar environment. The endless expanses of snow and ice had become our entire world. At first, the isolation and harsh conditions were challenging, but we'd settled into a routine. That all changed on what started as an ordinary Tuesday in late November. I woke up that morning to the familiar howling of the wind outside our reinforced shelter. As I went through my usual morning routine, getting dressed in my thermal layers, checking equipment readings, brewing a pot of coffee, everything seemed normal. Looking back, there were subtle signs that something was off, but at the time I brushed them aside. The temperature readout showed it was 40 degrees outside, even colder than usual, and when I glanced out the small window, the sky had an odd greenish tinge that I'd never seen before. My colleague Elena was already up, poring over data on her laptop. "Sleep okay?" I asked as I poured myself some coffee. She nodded absently, not looking up. "Yeah, fine. Though I had some weird dreams, kept hearing these sounds." I chuckled. "Probably just the wind playing tricks on you. You know how it gets out here." As the rest of the team slowly emerged from their bunks, we gathered for our daily briefing. Dr. Larson, our lead researcher, outlined the day's tasks, mostly routine data collection and equipment maintenance. "Oh, and keep an eye on the long-range comms," he added. "We've been having some interference issues the past couple days." I made a mental note to check on that later. After breakfast, I bundled up to head outside and check on some of our monitoring stations. The cold hit me like a physical force as I stepped out, stealing my breath away. I'd done this 100 times, but something felt different. The air seemed thicker somehow, almost oppressive, and that weird green tinge to the sky was even more pronounced now. As I trudged through the snow to the nearest station, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something out there in the white expanse. But there was never anything. Just snow and ice stretching to the horizon. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I reached the first monitoring station and got to work, my gloved hands clumsy as I checked connections and swapped out data cards. That's when I heard it. A low, pulsing hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I straightened up, looking around in confusion. It didn't sound like any of our equipment, or the wind, or anything I'd ever heard before. The sound faded after a few seconds. I shook my head, telling myself it was just my imagination. But as I finished up and started heading to the next station, I heard it again. This time it was louder, almost seeming to vibrate through my bones. I stumbled, nearly losing my footing in the deep snow. My heart was pounding now. Something was very wrong. I keyed my radio, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Base, this is Johnson. Are you picking up any unusual signals or sounds out here?" There was a long pause before Elena's voice crackled back, distorted by static. "Negative on that, Johnson. Everything's quiet here. You okay out there?" I hesitated, not sure how to explain what I was experiencing. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thought I heard something weird. Probably nothing. Johnson out." I hurried through my remaining tasks, eager to get back to the relative safety of the base. But with each passing minute, my unease grew. The humming sound came and went, sometimes so faint I could barely hear it, other times so loud I had to clamp my hands over my ears. And now I was seeing things in my peripheral vision. Flashes of movement, shadowy shapes that vanished when I turned to look. By the time I made it back to base, I was practically running. I burst through the airlock, gasping for breath. The rest of the team looked up in alarm. "What happened?" Dr. Larson demanded. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I struggled to put my experience into words, suddenly feeling foolish. I'm not sure. There was this sound out there and I kept seeing things." Elena frowned. "We didn't pick up anything unusual on the monitors. Are you sure you're feeling all right?" Before I could respond, the lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. There was a moment of confused shouting before the emergency generators kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. "What the hell?" muttered Dr. Larson, moving to check the systems. "We shouldn't be having power issues. The reactor's running fine." That's when we all heard it, the same pulsing hum I'd experienced outside, but louder now, seeming to come from the very walls around us, and with it came a bone-deep cold that cut through our thermal gear like it wasn't even there. "Oh my God," whispered Elena, her eyes wide with fear. "What is that?" We huddled together instinctively as the sound grew louder, drowning out even the howling wind outside. The temperature in the room plummeted, our breath coming out in thick clouds. Frost began creeping across the walls and floor, and then we saw them, shapes moving in the shadows at the edges of the room. Vaguely humanoid, but wrong somehow, like a child's crude drawing come to life. They flickered in and out of existence, always just out of clear view. Panic took hold. We ran for the communications room, desperate to call for help. But as Dr. Larson tried the long-range radio, all we got was a deafening burst of static that made us recoil in pain. "It's no use," he said, his voice shaking. "We're cut off." The next few hours were a nightmare. We barricaded ourselves in the main living area, pushing furniture against the doors. The shadows kept advancing, growing bolder. Sometimes they'd vanish entirely, only to reappear closer than before. The cold was unbearable now, and several of our team were showing signs of hypothermia, despite being indoors and bundled up. We tried everything we could think of, adjusting the shielding on the base, scanning for radiation or other environmental factors, even attempting to communicate with whatever was out there. Nothing worked. As night fell, or what passed for night in the perpetual darkness of Arctic winter, things escalated. The humming sound became a roar, and the shadows coalesced into more solid forms. They looked almost like people now, but distorted and wrong. Their faces were blank expanses of darkness, with pinpricks of light where eyes should be. One of our team, a quiet guy named Mike, suddenly started screaming. He clawed at his ears, shouting that he could hear voices in his head. Before we could stop him, he ran for the airlock. We heard it cycle open, then silence. He never came back. The rest of us huddled together, terrified and exhausted. None of us slept. We took turns watching, though I'm not sure what good it did. The entities, or whatever they were, seemed to be toying with us. They'd appear right next to someone, reaching out with misshapen limbs, only to vanish when we tried to focus on them. I don't know how long this went on. Time seemed to lose all meaning. We were all freezing, our minds foggy from lack of sleep and constant fear. At some point I noticed that Dr. Larson was missing. I have no memory of him leaving our group. He was just gone. As what I think was dawn approached, things reached a fever pitch. The humming became so loud it was painful. The shadow creatures were everywhere now, pressing in on all sides. I remember Elena grabbing my arm, shouting something I couldn't hear over the noise, and then, as suddenly as it had all started, it stopped. The humming cut off. The oppressive cold lifted. The shadows melted away like mist in sunlight. We were left blinking in confusion, unsure if what we'd experienced had been real or some kind of shared hallucination. We cautiously explored the base. Everything was coated in a thick layer of frost, but otherwise undamaged. There was no sign of Mike or Dr. Larson. Our communications were still down, and it would be days before we were able to get a distress signal out. When the rescue team finally arrived, they found 4 shaken survivors with a story they couldn't explain. There was no physical evidence of what we'd experienced, no unusual readings, no unexplained damage. Mike and Dr. Larson were declared lost, presumed dead in the harsh Arctic environment. It's been years now, and I still don't know what happened that day. Was it some kind of mass psychosis brought on by isolation, a yet unknown atmospheric phenomenon, or something truly beyond our understanding? All I know is that sometimes, when the wind howls just right, I swear I can still hear that pulsing hum, and I find myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those shadow figures lurking just out of sight. I was always fascinated by abandoned places, but nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered at the old military base outside of town. My friends and I had been exploring urban ruins for years, but this was different. The base had been decommissioned decades ago, left to rot in the desert. We'd heard rumors about it for years, whispers of secret experiments and strange occurrences. I never put much stock in conspiracy theories, but something about this place gave me chills from the moment we arrived. There were 5 of us that day, myself, Jake, Melissa, Chris, and Taylor. We parked about a mile away and hiked in, not wanting to draw attention. As we approached, I was struck by how massive the complex was. Rows of dilapidated buildings stretched as far as I could see, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with rusted barbed wire. The fence had collapsed in several places, allowing us easy access. The first building we entered appeared to be some kind of administrative office. Dust-covered desks and filing cabinets filled the rooms. Most of the drawers were empty, but we found a few old documents, mundane things like supply orders and personnel files. Nothing too exciting, but it was still eerie being in a place frozen in time like that. As we moved deeper into the complex, things started to get stranger. We came across a lab with rows of examination tables and what looked like old medical equipment. The walls were lined with cages, some small enough for rats, others large enough for... Well, I didn't want to think about what might have fit in those. In one corner, we found a heavy metal door with multiple locks. It took all of us working together to pry it open. Inside was a small, windowless room. The walls, floor, and ceiling were covered in some kind of metallic material. In the center stood a chair with thick leather straps. "What the hell went on in here?" Jake whispered. I shook my head, feeling a chill run down my spine. "I don't know, but I've got a bad feeling about this place." We decided to split up to cover more ground. In hindsight, that was probably our first big mistake. Melissa and I headed towards what looked like a control room of some kind. Banks of old computers and monitoring equipment filled the space. Most of it was dead, but a few screens still flickered with static. As we examined the equipment, I noticed something odd. One of the monitors seemed to be showing a thermal image of the room we were in. Two bright orange figures stood out against the cool blue background. "Mel, check this out," I said, pointing to the screen. "I think that's us." She leaned in for a closer look. "That's weird. How is this even powered on after all these years?" Before I could respond, movement on another screen caught my eye. It showed a hallway not far from where we were, and a third orange figure was moving through it. "Is that one of the others?" Melissa asked. I shook my head slowly. "No, they went in the opposite direction." We stared at each other for a long moment, both realizing the implications. There was someone else in the base with us. Just then, our walkie-talkies crackled to life. It was Chris, his voice tight with fear. "Guys, you need to get over here now. We found something. Oh, God." The transmission cut off abruptly. Melissa and I exchanged worried glances before racing out of the control room. We tried calling the others on the radio, but got nothing but static in response. As we ran through the maze-like corridors, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. More than once, I caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to find nothing there when I turned to look. We finally found the others in what appeared to be some kind of testing chamber. Jake and Taylor were huddled around Chris, who was sitting on the floor looking pale and shaken. "What happened?" I asked as we burst into the room. "Are you guys okay?" Jake looked up at us, his face grim. "Chris saw something. We're not sure what it was, but..." Chris cut him off, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't human. Whatever it was, it wasn't human." I felt my blood run cold. "What do you mean? What did you see?" Chris shook his head, struggling to find the words. "It was tall, way too tall to be a person. And its limbs, they were all wrong. Like they had extra joints or something. I only saw it for a second before it disappeared around a corner, but..." He trailed off, shuddering at the memory. Before anyone could respond, a low hum filled the air. It started soft, but quickly grew in intensity, until it was almost painful. The lights in the room began to flicker and pulse in sync with the sound. "We need to get out of here," Melissa shouted over the noise. "Now!" We didn't need to be told twice. We ran for the exit, the strange hum seeming to follow us through the corridors. As we sprinted past the old lab, I glanced inside and froze in horror. The cages were open, all of them. "Keep moving," Jake yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me along. As we neared the exit, the hum reached a fever pitch. The air itself seemed to vibrate around us. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. A dark shape was moving towards us, impossibly fast. Its form seemed to shift and twist as it moved, defying the laws of physics. We burst out of the building and ran for our lives, not stopping until we reached the car. As we peeled out of there, I looked back at the base one last time. For just a moment, I swear I saw dozens of shadowy figures standing at the fence line, watching us go. The drive home was silent, all of us too shaken to speak. We agreed to never talk about what happened that day, but I know none of us will ever forget it. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that strange hum in my dreams, and I wonder, what exactly did we stumble upon in that abandoned base? What horrors had been left behind when the military pulled out? I don't have any answers, but I know one thing for certain. Some places are abandoned for a reason, and some secrets are better left buried. I was part of a team of volcanologists on an expedition to a remote volcanic region in Indonesia. We'd been planning this trip for months, excited to study some little-known volcanoes on a small island chain. As the lead geochemist, I was particularly eager to collect gas and lava samples that could provide new insights into the area's unique geology. The journey to reach our research site was arduous. After a long series of flights, we took a small chartered boat to the main island, then hiked for 2 days through dense jungle to reach our base camp near the volcanic field. The isolation was palpable. We were easily 100 miles from the nearest village, surrounded by pristine wilderness. Our first few days went smoothly as we set up our equipment and began preliminary surveys of the area. The location was breathtaking, with several cinder cones and a massive shield volcano looming on the horizon. The rich volcanic soil supported lush vegetation, with colorful birds flitting between the trees. Despite the beauty, there was an unsettling stillness to the place. No large animals were visible, and even insect sounds seemed muted. On our 4th day, we hiked to the largest nearby cinder cone to collect rock samples and take gas readings. As we neared the summit, I noticed something odd about the ground beneath our feet. The volcanic rocks had an unusual sheen, almost metallic, that I'd never encountered before. I bagged several samples, eager to analyze them back at camp. We reached the crater rim by mid-afternoon. The view into the caldera was obscured by thick white steam venting from multiple fissures. My colleague David prepared to take gas readings while I set up my equipment to gather lava samples. That's when things started to get strange. As David held up the gas detector, it began emitting a high-pitched whine. He frowned, shaking the device. That's weird. It's picking up some kind of emissions, but nothing I've ever seen before. The readouts don't make any sense. I walked over to look at the screen, which was flickering with bizarre symbols that didn't correspond to any known chemical compounds. A chill ran down my spine despite the intense heat. Before I could comment, the ground beneath us shuddered. We stumbled back from the rim as a massive plume of steam erupted from the crater. But this was like no volcanic gas I'd ever encountered. The vapor shimmered with an oily rainbow sheen. As it billowed around us, I felt a strange tingling sensation on my exposed skin. "We need to get out of here," I shouted to the team over the roar of the venting gas. We scrambled down the slope, slipping on the loose scree. The tingling had intensified to a burning sensation, and I could see angry red welts forming on my arms. When we finally reached the base of the cinder cone, we paused to catch our breath and assess the situation. The strange gas cloud was dissipating, but an eerie glow now emanated from the crater. It pulsed with a sickly greenish light that seemed to move and writhe of its own accord. "What the hell was that?" gasped Maria, our volcanologist specializing in gas emissions. She was staring at her arms, which were covered in the same welts as mine. "I've never seen volcanic gases cause chemical burns like this." I shook my head, at a loss for words. Nothing about this aligned with known volcanic behavior. As a scientist, I prided myself on finding rational explanations. But in that moment, a creeping dread told me we'd stumbled into something beyond the realm of conventional geology. We hurried back to base camp, all of us shaken by the experience. As the team doctor treated our chemical burns, we debated what to do next. The logical choice was to evacuate and report our findings to the authorities. But scientific curiosity warred with caution. We'd come all this way, and this could be a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. In the end, we decided to stay one more day to gather additional data before leaving. Looking back, I wish we'd trusted our instincts and gotten out while we could. That night, I was awoken by a low, thrumming vibration. At first, I thought it was just residual ringing in my ears from the day's events, but as I became more alert, I realized the sound was coming from outside the tent. I unzipped the flap and peered out into the darkness. What I saw stopped my breath in my throat. The entire landscape was alive with pulsing bioluminescent light. It coursed through the ground in web-like patterns, flowing towards the volcanoes on the horizon. The mountains themselves seemed to glow from within, like massive geological hearts beating in sync with the energy in the earth. I scrambled to wake the others, and soon we all stood transfixed by the impossible scene before us. The thrumming grew louder, reverberating in our chests. Small stones began to vibrate and dance across the ground. "We need to leave, now." David's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. No one argued as we hurriedly broke down the camp, stuffing our gear haphazardly into our packs. As we worked, the vibrations intensified. The ground began to split and crack, glowing veins of what looked like lava spreading like a web. But this was no ordinary lava. It moved with purpose, tendrils reaching out as if searching for something. We ran. There was no other word for our panicked flight through the jungle in the eerie, pulsing light. Branches whipped at our faces as we stumbled over roots and uneven ground. The earth continued to fracture behind us, the otherworldly energy pursuing us like a living thing. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to warp and stretch, minutes feeling like hours. My lungs burned, and my legs trembled with exhaustion. But terror kept us moving, driven by the primal instinct to escape. Finally, mercifully, we burst out of the jungle onto the beach where we'd first landed. Our boat was still moored offshore, gently rocking in the pre-dawn light. We splashed into the surf, desperation lending us strength as we swam to the vessel. As David cranked the engine to life, I looked back at the island. The strange light was fading, receding like a tide back towards the volcanic heights. Within moments, it vanished entirely, leaving the landscape looking perfectly ordinary in the growing daylight. We sat in stunned silence as the boat carried us away from the island. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts, trying to process what we'd experienced. The rational part of my mind scrambled for explanations. Undiscovered bioluminescent organisms, rare geomagnetic phenomena, hallucinogenic gases. But deep down, I knew we'd encountered something that defied scientific understanding. It's been 3 months since that night, and I still struggle to make sense of what happened. Our scientific equipment was mostly destroyed in our frantic escape, leaving us with little physical evidence. The rock samples I'd collected earlier show no unusual properties under analysis. Even our chemical burns healed without a trace, as if they'd never existed. Sometimes I wonder if it was all some kind of shared delusion brought on by toxic volcanic gases. But then I close my eyes and see that pulsing, living light, and I know it was real. Whatever force dwells in that remote volcanic region, it's something beyond our current scientific understanding. Part of me wants to go back to unravel the mystery, but a deeper, more primal part knows that some things are better left undisturbed. I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at a volcano the same way again. The earth beneath our feet holds secrets far stranger and more terrifying than we can imagine. And sometimes, when I wake in the night, I swear I can still feel that otherworldly thrumming, calling me back to that island of living fire. I was part of a small research team tasked with studying remote rural communities in the Appalachian Mountains. Our goal was to document unique cultural practices and folkways that had been preserved in isolated pockets of the region. After months of preparation, we set out for one of the most secluded areas we could find, a tiny settlement deep in the mountains that didn't even appear on most maps. The journey there was arduous. We drove for hours on increasingly narrow and treacherous mountain roads until even those petered out. The last few miles were on foot, following what was barely more than a game trail through dense forest. As we hiked, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The woods felt unnaturally quiet and still, devoid of the usual sounds of birds and wildlife. More than once, I caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to see nothing when I turned to look. Finally, we emerged into a small clearing where a cluster of run-down cabins huddled together. The settlement was even more primitive than I'd expected. No electricity, no running water, structures that looked like they hadn't been updated in a century. As we approached, weathered faces peered out at us from darkened windows. Children playing outside froze and stared before scattering like startled animals. An elderly man emerged from one of the cabins to greet us. He introduced himself as Ezekiel and welcomed us to the community, but there was wariness in his eyes. When we explained the purpose of our visit, he nodded slowly. "You're welcome to stay and observe our ways," he said, "but there's much here that outsiders don't understand. Best to keep to yourselves and not interfere." Over the next few days, we did our best to integrate ourselves into the community and document their lifestyle. But from the start, there were odd details that didn't add up. Despite their isolation, the villagers seemed remarkably healthy and well-fed. Their crops were lush and abundant, even though the Rocky Mountain soil looked barely arable. There were other unsettling elements. Intricate symbols were carved into doorways and fence posts. Bundles of herbs and feathers hung from the eaves of every building. At night, we'd hear eerie rhythmic chanting echoing from deep in the woods. When we asked about these things, we were met with evasive answers or stony silence. The real strangeness began on our third night there. I woke in the pitch darkness to find the cabin unnaturally cold. As my eyes adjusted, I realized with a jolt that there was a figure standing motionless at the foot of my cot. It was inhumanly tall and thin, its proportions all wrong. I tried to cry out, but no sound came. After what felt like an eternity, it slowly turned and glided out through the solid wood door. I lay there frozen in terror until dawn, convinced I must have been dreaming. But when I finally worked up the courage to examine the door, there were muddy footprints leading both in and out. That day, I quietly shared what I'd seen with my colleagues. To my shock, they'd all had similar experiences. James had awoken to find symbols carved into his skin that faded by morning. Maria's notebooks had been filled with pages of strange writing she didn't remember doing. We confronted Ezekiel, demanding answers. His face grew grave. "I warned you not to interfere," he said. "There are old powers in these mountains, ancient spirits that protect us, but don't take kindly to outsiders. You've drawn their attention now. For your own safety, you need to leave. Immediately." We didn't need to be told twice. We hurriedly packed our belongings and practically ran down the mountain trail. The whole way, I could feel unseen eyes boring into my back. Branches seemed to reach out to grab at us. More than once, I heard whispers and laughter that couldn't have come from my companions. Just as we reached our vehicles, an ear-splitting shriek pierced the air. We piled in and took off down the rutted road as fast as we dared. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of something massive moving through the trees behind us. Then we rounded a bend, and it was gone. We drove for hours in tense silence before finally feeling safe enough to pull over and talk about what had happened. We all agreed that there were forces at work in that village that defied rational explanation. Looking through our notes and photographs, we were horrified to find that most of the evidence of what we'd seen had vanished. Pictures were blurred or completely black. Recordings were nothing but static. In the end, we decided it was best not to speak of what we'd experienced. Who would believe us? But I still have nightmares about those nights in the mountains. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I could swear I hear that same unearthly shriek echoing in the distance. Whatever dwells in those remote hollows, I pray it stays there, forgotten by the outside world. Some secrets are best left buried. I still remember that day like it was yesterday. My friends and I had always been fascinated by urban exploration, seeking out abandoned places to investigate. When we heard rumors about an old mining town that had been deserted decades ago, we knew we had to check it out. There were 5 of us: myself, Jake, Alex, Emily, and Chris. We packed up our gear early one Saturday morning and made the long drive out to the remote area where the mines were located. As we got closer, the landscape became more desolate. Rusted-out equipment and dilapidated buildings started appearing along the roadside. We parked at what looked like it used to be the main entrance to the mining complex. An old sign, faded and barely legible, warned about danger and trespassing. Of course, that only made us more eager to explore. We grabbed our backpacks full of supplies and flashlights and headed in. At first, it was pretty much what we expected. Crumbling structures, broken windows, debris scattered everywhere. We poked around some of the old administrative buildings and workers' quarters, snapping photos and marveling at how nature was slowly reclaiming the area. But as we ventured deeper into the complex, things started to feel off. The air got noticeably colder and damper. Sounds seemed muffled, like we were underwater. I remember feeling a sense of unease creeping over me, though I couldn't pinpoint why. We came across the entrance to one of the main mine shafts. The heavy metal doors were rusted open, revealing a gaping black maw leading underground. A musty, earthy smell wafted out. Jake shone his flashlight down the tunnel, but the beam was quickly swallowed by darkness. "Should we check it out?" he asked, an excited glint in his eye. I hesitated. Every instinct was screaming at me to turn back, to get out of there. but I didn't want to seem like a coward in front of my friends. "I guess we came all this way," I said with forced nonchalance. "Might as well take a look." We flicked on our headlamps and ventured into the tunnel. Our footsteps echoed eerily off the damp stone walls. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. As we went deeper, I noticed strange markings carved into the walls, symbols I didn't recognize, almost like some kind of ancient language. After what felt like an eternity of walking, the tunnel opened up into a massive cavern. Our lights barely penetrated the inky blackness. The air felt thick, almost oppressive. That's when we heard it, a low, rumbling sound coming from somewhere in the depths of the cave. "What was that?" Emily whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "Probably just settling rocks or something," Alex said, but he didn't sound convinced. We pressed on, picking our way carefully across the uneven cave floor. Our lights swept across abandoned mining equipment, carts filled with ore, pickaxes left where they'd been dropped decades ago. It was like the miners had just up and vanished in the middle of their work. The rumbling grew louder as we went deeper. It almost felt like the very ground was vibrating beneath our feet. A faint glow appeared in the distance, not the warm yellow of lantern light, but an eerie, pulsing blue-green. As we got closer, I could make out what looked like a pit in the center of the cavern. The strange light was emanating from deep within it. The walls of the pit were covered in more of those bizarre symbols, glowing faintly. We approached the edge and peered down. The pit seemed to go on forever, descending into impossible depths. That's when things got really weird. The rumbling suddenly intensified, and a gust of wind came howling up from the pit. But it wasn't just wind. There were voices in it, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. The glowing symbols on the walls began to shift and move, rearranging themselves before our eyes. "What the hell?" Chris shouted over the noise. I felt a tugging sensation, like something was trying to pull me towards the pit. Emily screamed as she stumbled, nearly falling in before Jake grabbed her arm. "We need to get out of here," I yelled. We turned to run, but the cavern had changed. Tunnels that weren't there before had opened up in the walls. The few landmarks I'd tried to memorize on our way in were gone or in different places. It was like the entire cave system was shifting around us. Panic set in as we realized we were lost. We ran blindly through twisting passages, the otherworldly howling seeming to come from all directions. Rocks crumbled from the ceiling, barely missing us. At one point I could have sworn I saw shapes moving in the shadows, vaguely humanoid, but wrong somehow. I don't know how long we ran. It felt like hours. My lungs were burning, my legs ready to give out. Just when I thought we couldn't go on, we rounded a corner and saw daylight ahead. We burst out of the mine entrance, gasping and coughing. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. As we peeled out of there, I looked back at the abandoned mining complex. For just a moment, I thought I saw a massive, dark shape rising up behind the buildings, but I blinked and it was gone. The drive home was silent. We were all trying to process what had happened, if it had even been real. When we got back to town, we discovered our couple-hour exploration had actually taken almost 2 days. Somehow, we'd lost over 24 hours in those caves. In the days that followed, we tried to research the mining town, to find some explanation for what we'd experienced, but we found almost nothing. It was like the place had been erased from history. The few scattered references we did find mentioned a major accident that had shut down operations, but details were suspiciously scarce. It's been years now, and I still have nightmares about that day. The glowing symbols, the whispering voices, the feeling of some vast and ancient presence stirring in the depths of the earth. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat. certain I can hear that low rumbling outside my window. My friends and I don't talk about it much anymore. We've drifted apart over the years, but I think on some level we're all still trying to make sense of what happened. I've thought about going back, trying to find answers. But then I remember the terror I felt in those caves, the sense that we'd stumbled into something far beyond our understanding. Whatever is down there in those abandoned mines, I think it's best left undisturbed. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. I was part of a small research team sent to investigate an uncharted island in the South Pacific. As a marine biologist specializing in coral reef ecosystems, I was thrilled at the opportunity to potentially discover new species in such an isolated location. Our team of 5 scientists had been planning this expedition for months, poring over satellite imagery and historical records to piece together what little information we could about this mysterious landmass. As our small chartered boat approached the island's rocky shores, I felt a mixture of excitement and unease. The island rose abruptly from the sea, its steep cliffs covered in dense jungle vegetation. Strangely, I couldn't hear any of the typical sounds you'd expect from a tropical island. No birds calling, no insects buzzing. Just an eerie silence, broken only by the lapping of waves. We anchored offshore and took a small inflatable raft to a narrow strip of beach. As soon as we stepped onto the sand, I was struck by how unnaturally warm it felt under my feet, almost uncomfortably hot, despite it being early morning. Dr. Chen, our geologist, remarked that the island must have significant volcanic activity to produce such heat. We began to set up our base camp, pitching tents and unpacking our research equipment. That's when I noticed something odd about the sand. It seemed to shift and move subtly, even when there was no wind. I chalked it up to my imagination at first, but then caught Dr. Reeves, our entomologist, staring at the ground with a puzzled expression. "Are you seeing this too?" I asked her quietly. She nodded slowly. "It's almost like the sand is alive somehow. I've never seen anything like it." As the day progressed, we ventured further inland to begin our surveys. The dense jungle was unlike any ecosystem I'd encountered before. The plants seemed to pulse with an inner light, their leaves an iridescent blue-green that hurt my eyes to look at directly. When I tried to take a sample, the leaf crumbled to ash in my hands. Dr. Reeves let out a startled yelp behind me. I turned to see her frantically batting at her legs. "Something crawled up my pants," she exclaimed. But when we looked, there was nothing there. These unsettling incidents continued to pile up as we explored. Our compasses spun wildly, rendering them useless. Our satellite phones couldn't get a signal, even though they had worked fine on the beach. Most disturbingly, we all experienced moments where time seemed to slip. One minute it was noon, the next the sun was setting, with no memory of the intervening hours. As night fell, we huddled around our camp, comparing notes on the day's bizarre occurrences. That's when we heard it, a low, pulsing hum that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. It started soft, but grew in intensity until I could feel it vibrating in my chest. Dr. Chen suggested we investigate the source. In retrospect, that was our fatal mistake. We shouldered our packs and followed the sound deeper into the island's interior. The jungle seemed to close in around us, the strange glowing plants casting writhing shadows. After what felt like hours of hiking, we emerged into a massive circular clearing. In the center was a structure that defied description. It seemed to shift and change as I looked at it, one moment appearing as a towering obsidian obelisk, the next as a spiraling vortex of energy. The humming grew to a deafening roar. Suddenly, tendrils of light shot out from the structure, enveloping Dr. Chen. He let out a blood-curdling scream as his body began to warp and twist. I watched in horror as he seemed to fold in on himself, shrinking and contorting until he vanished with a soft pop. Panic overtook us. We turned and ran blindly back the way we came, branches whipping our faces as we crashed through the underbrush. I could hear the agonized cries of my colleagues as one by one they too were caught by those terrible tendrils of light. I don't know how long I ran or how I found my way back to the beach. My mind was a blur of terror and adrenaline. As I reached the shore, I saw our boat drifting away, as if pulled by an invisible current. I dove into the water and swam with every ounce of strength I had left. I must have passed out from exhaustion, because the next thing I remember is waking up in a fishing boat miles from the island. The fishermen who rescued me said they found me clinging to a piece of driftwood, delirious and babbling about monsters in the jungle. It's been 3 months since that day, and I still wake up screaming some nights. I've tried to tell the authorities what happened, to mount a rescue mission for my missing colleagues. But when I give them the coordinates of the island, they insist there's nothing there, just empty ocean for hundreds of miles. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all, if the stress of the expedition caused some kind of mental break. But then I look at the strange, iridescent burn on my arm, where one of those tendrils of light grazed me, and I know it was real. Whatever is on that island, it defies our understanding of reality, and I fear that one day it may not stay confined to that remote patch of ocean. I can only hope that by sharing my story, I can warn others of the dangers lurking in the unexplored corners of our world. Because I know that island is out there, waiting, and I shudder to think what might happen if someone else stumbles upon its shores. I was part of a team of biologists conducting a survey of the Okefenokee Swamp in southern Georgia. We'd been out there for about a week, cataloging plant and animal species in one of the most biodiverse ecosystems in North America. It was hot, humid work, slogging through knee-deep water and mud, swatting away clouds of mosquitoes, and keeping a wary eye out for alligators. But we were making good progress and had already identified several rare species. On our 8th day in the swamp, things took a turn for the bizarre. We'd ventured deeper into the interior than we had previously, to an area of particularly dense cypress forest. The trees were massive here, their gnarled roots creating a maze-like environment of knees and hollows beneath the murky water. Spanish moss hung in thick curtains from the branches, further obscuring our view. As we carefully picked our way through the labyrinth, I began to notice something odd. The normal sounds of the swamp, the drone of insects, the calls of birds and frogs, had faded away. An eerie silence settled over us, broken only by the quiet sloshing of our footsteps. The air felt thick and oppressive, almost like wading through invisible syrup. "Hey guys, does something feel off to you?" I asked, glancing around at my teammates. Dr. Larson, our lead researcher, furrowed his brow. "Now that you mention it, yes. The biodiversity readings on my equipment have dropped to nearly 0. That shouldn't be possible in an environment like this." As we pondered this anomaly, a faint greenish glow caught my eye. At first I thought it was just swamp gas, but as I looked closer I realized it was coming from beneath the water's surface, The glow seemed to pulse gently, like a heartbeat. "Look at this," I said, pointing it out to the others. We gathered around, peering into the murky depths. The light seemed to be emanating from some kind of growth or fungus clinging to the submerged cypress roots. As we watched, transfixed, the pulsing intensified. Suddenly, the water around us began to bubble and churn. The green glow spread rapidly, enveloping us in its sickly light. I felt a strange, tingling sensation all over my body, like static electricity. The others cried out in alarm as well. "We need to get out of here," Dr. Larson shouted. But as we turned to retreat, we found our way blocked by a wall of shimmering green light. It was as if reality itself had become warped and distorted around us. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped. The green energy continued to intensify, making it hard to see or think clearly. My skin felt like it was crawling, and I swear I could feel something probing at the edges of my mind. Then, rising from the roiling water in front of us, a shape began to form. At first it was just a vague, billowing mass. But as we watched in horror, it coalesced into a vaguely humanoid figure, easily 10 feet tall. Its body seemed to be composed of swirling green energy, constantly shifting and reforming. Where a face should have been, there was only a swirling vortex of light. We stood frozen, unable to comprehend what we were seeing. The entity tilted its featureless head as if studying us. Then a voice echoed in my mind, not words exactly, but a stream of alien concepts and images that made my brain feel like it was going to explode. Beside me, Dr. Larson collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. "It's trying to communicate," he gasped. "But our minds can't process it." The strange download of information continued for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. I caught glimpses of vast cosmic vistas, of life forms beyond imagining, of the intricate web of energy connecting all things. It was beautiful and terrifying and utterly overwhelming. Just when I thought my sanity would shatter, it stopped. The entity's form began to dissipate, sinking back into the roiling water. The wall of green energy faded, and normal sounds of the swamp gradually returned. We stood there shaking, trying to process what had just happened. Did that really just happen?" whispered Amanda, our botanist. Her face was pale and drawn. I think so," I replied, my voice trembling, "but I have no idea what it was." Dr. Larson was scribbling frantically in his notebook, muttering to himself, "Interdimensional entity, non-carbon-based life form, psychic communication." He looked up at us, his eyes wild. "Do you realize what this means? Everything we thought we knew about life, about the nature of reality itself, it's all wrong." We stumbled our way back to camp in a daze, each lost in our own thoughts. That night, huddled around the campfire, we tried to make sense of our encounter. None of us could fully articulate what we'd experienced. It was like trying to describe a color that doesn't exist. "Maybe it was some kind of swamp gas hallucination," suggested Mike, our geologist. But the haunted look in his eyes told me he didn't really believe that. "No," said Dr. Larson firmly. "It was real, and it changes everything." He held up his notebook, filled with equations and diagrams I couldn't begin to understand. I think it was trying to teach us something about the true nature of life, of consciousness, of the universe itself. But our minds simply weren't equipped to fully grasp it. We spent the rest of the expedition searching for any trace of the entity or the strange bioluminescent growth, but found nothing. It was as if that section of the swamp had never existed. Our equipment showed no anomalous readings, and there was no physical evidence of what we'd encountered. As we packed up to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every ripple on the water's surface made me jump. What else was out there, hidden just beyond the veil of our perception? We've been back for months now, but I still have nightmares about that day in the swamp. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, my mind reeling with fragments of impossible knowledge that fade as soon as I try to grasp them. Dr. Larson has become obsessed, working day and night on complex theories that he claims will revolutionize our understanding of, well, everything. The others have tried to move on, to forget what happened. But I know we've all been changed by that encounter. There are things out there beyond our comprehension, life forms that defy our very definition of life. And sometimes, in the liminal spaces of our world, the veil between dimensions grows thin. I find myself drawn back to the swamp, hoping for another glimpse of that otherworldly entity. But I'm also terrified of what might happen if I do encounter it again. Would my mind be able to withstand another download of cosmic knowledge? Or would I be lost forever in realms beyond human understanding? All I know is that the world feels different now. Bigger, stranger, full of infinite possibilities and hidden wonders. And somewhere out there, in the murky depths of an ancient swamp, an entity beyond our comprehension is waiting, ready to shatter our perception of reality once again. I was never one to believe in the supernatural. As a wildlife biologist, I've always relied on science and facts to guide my understanding of the world. But after what happened during our latest expedition to the Blackwater Nature Reserve, I'm not so sure anymore. I still can't make sense of it, even weeks later. It started as a routine conservation trip. Our team of 5 researchers was tasked with conducting wildlife surveys and habitat assessments in a remote section of the reserve that hadn't been properly studied in years. We were excited for the opportunity to gather new data on endangered species in the area. The first few days were uneventful as we hiked deeper into the wilderness, setting up motion-activated cameras and collecting samples. But on the 4th night, things took a strange turn. I was on watch duty, sitting by our dimly lit campfire as the others slept. Around 2 a.m., I heard rustling in the undergrowth nearby. Thinking it was probably just a deer or raccoon, I shined my flashlight in that direction. What I saw made my blood run cold. 2 glowing yellow eyes stared back at me from the darkness. They were far larger than any animal native to the area. As I watched in stunned silence, a massive shape began to materialize around those eyes. It was vaguely humanoid but impossibly tall, at least 9 or 10 feet. Its body seemed to be made of swirling shadows that never quite held a solid form. I wanted to scream, to wake the others, but I was paralyzed with fear. The entity tilted its head, regarding me with what felt like cold curiosity. Then, in the blink of an eye, it vanished. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, convinced I was losing my mind. When morning came, I decided not to tell the others what I'd seen. I figured they'd think I was crazy or had dozed off and had a nightmare. But as we continued our expedition that day, it became clear something was very wrong in these woods. The forest had fallen eerily silent. No bird calls, no insect buzzing, not even the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. It was as if all wildlife had suddenly vacated the area. My colleagues noticed it too. "It's weird how quiet it is," Anna remarked as we trudged through a meadow. "I've never experienced anything like this before." "Yeah, it's giving me the creeps," Mike agreed. "Maybe there's a predator in the area that scared everything off." I wished that was the explanation, but deep down I knew it was something far stranger. As dusk approached, we decided to set up camp near a small stream. That's when we made a disturbing discovery. All of our camera traps, sophisticated weatherproof equipment designed to withstand the elements, had been completely destroyed. The metal casings were twisted and warped, as if exposed to extreme heat, and the memory cards inside were fried beyond recovery. "What the hell could have done this?" Chris exclaimed, examining the mangled remains of one camera. "It looks like they were hit by lightning or something." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered those piercing yellow eyes from the night before. I knew I had to speak up. "Guys, there's something I need to tell you," I began hesitantly. "Last night when I was on watch, I saw something that shouldn't exist." I recounted my experience, half expecting them to laugh it off. But to my surprise, they listened intently, their faces growing more concerned as I described the shadowy figure. "I saw something too," Anna said quietly once I'd finished. "I thought it was just my imagination, but early this morning I woke up to use the bathroom. As I was walking back to my tent, I glimpsed movement out of the corner of my eye. When I turned to look, I saw this mass of darkness, like a living shadow slipping between the trees. It was gone in an instant." One by one, the others shared their own unsettling experiences, strange noises in the night, glimpses of impossibly large creatures, an overwhelming sense of being watched. We realized that whatever was out here, it had been stalking us for days. Shaken, we decided to abort the mission and hike back to base camp first thing in the morning. None of us wanted to spend another night in this haunted forest. But as we huddled around the campfire that evening, trying to make sense of what was happening, things escalated quickly. The temperature plummeted, our breath visible in the frigid air despite it being the middle of summer. An unnatural fog began rolling in, so thick we could barely see a few feet in front of us. And then we heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, sending vibrations through my whole body. "We need to get out of here now," Mike yelled, panic evident in his voice. We scrambled to grab our essential gear, abandoning the rest as we fled into the mist-shrouded woods. I've never run so fast in my life, branches whipping at my face as I struggled to keep sight of my teammates. The growling grew louder, closer. I could hear heavy footfalls behind us, the snap of trees being pushed aside by something massive. Risking a glance over my shoulder, I caught a glimpse of those glowing yellow eyes, now multiplied. 3 pairs, then 5, then too many to count, all around us in the fog. Just when I thought we couldn't run any further, the trees opened up into a clearing. To our shock and relief, we found ourselves back at the trailhead, where we'd started our expedition nearly a week ago. Our truck was still there untouched. We piled in, tires squealing as Mike floored it out of there. Only when we were miles away, safely back on the main highway, did we finally slow down and try to process what had just happened. The following weeks have been a blur of debriefings, psych evaluations, and attempts to rationalize our experience. The official report chalks it up to mass hysteria triggered by isolation and stress. Our destroyed equipment is blamed on lightning strikes and animal interference. But I know what I saw, what we all saw. There's something out there in Blackwater Reserve that defies explanation. Something ancient and powerful that doesn't want humans encroaching on its territory. I still have nightmares about those glowing eyes emerging from the shadows. I don't think I'll ever be able to look at a forest the same way again. Whatever is lurking in those woods, It's clear that there are forces in nature far beyond our understanding. I'm sharing this story as a warning. If you ever find yourself in Blackwater Reserve or any remote wilderness for that matter, be careful, be respectful, and if you hear that bone-chilling growl or catch a glimpse of yellow eyes in the darkness, run. Run as fast as you can and don't look back, because there are things out there that humans were never meant to encounter, things that remind us that for all our scientific knowledge, we're still just visitors in this world, and some places are better left unexplored. I was part of a 5-person research team studying high-altitude ecosystems in a remote mountain range. We'd been planning this expedition for months, meticulously preparing our gear and reviewing topographical maps of the area. It was supposed to be a routine 2-week trip to collect data and samples, but nothing could have prepared us for what we encountered up there. The first few days went smoothly as we made our ascent. We set up base camp at around 12,000 feet and began our daily excursions to catalog plant and animal species. The isolation was exhilarating. Nothing but jagged peaks and wide-open sky in every direction. No cell service, no other humans for hundreds of miles. Just us and the raw wilderness. On day 4, things started to get strange. We woke up to find bizarre geometric patterns etched into the rocky ground around our tents. Perfect circles, triangles, and spirals that definitely weren't there the night before. We all stood there staring at them in confusion. James, our geologist, insisted they must have been caused by some kind of localized seismic activity. But I had a gnawing feeling that didn't add up. As we continued our research that day, an oppressive silence fell over the mountain. The constant background noise of wind and birdsong just stopped. The air felt thick and heavy, like wading through invisible syrup. Every movement took extra effort. We exchanged uneasy glances, but pressed on with our work. That night, I was awoken by a low humming sound. At first I thought it was just the blood rushing in my ears from the altitude. But as I became more alert, I realized it was coming from outside the tent. I unzipped the flap and peered out. What I saw made my blood run cold. Hovering about 50 feet above our camp was a pulsing orb of light, maybe 10 feet in diameter. It emitted a soft, bluish glow and seemed to shimmer and undulate, like a soap bubble caught in sunlight. The hum was definitely coming from the orb. I must have made some kind of sound, because the others started to stir. As they emerged from their tents, the orb suddenly flared brilliantly. I threw my arm up to shield my eyes. When I looked again, it was gone. We spent the rest of the night huddled together, too unsettled to sleep. The next morning, no one quite knew what to say. We went through the motions of our research, but our hearts weren't in it. Every rustle of wind made us jump. The usual camaraderie of the group had evaporated, replaced by tense silence. Around midday, Lisa let out a strangled cry. We all turned to see her pointing at something in the distance. Squinting against the glare, I could just make out a figure standing on a ridge about half a mile away. It was unnaturally tall and thin, its proportions all wrong for a human. Before I could get a better look, it melted away like a mirage. We decided to cut our expedition short and head back down the mountain. As we hastily broke down the camp, I noticed strange symbols carved into a nearby boulder. Angular runes that looked almost like writing, but in no language I'd ever seen. A chill ran down my spine as I realized they were identical to tattoos I'd glimpsed on the impossibly tall figure. The descent was nerve-wracking. We felt watched from all sides, though we never saw anything concrete. just flashes of movement in our peripheral vision, gone when we turned to look. The symbols appeared with increasing frequency, etched into rocks, scrawled in the dirt, even carved into the bark of twisted old trees that clung to the mountainside. On the second day of our retreat, we ran into an impenetrable wall of fog. 1 minute the path ahead was clear, the next it was obscured by roiling white mist. We forged ahead cautiously, but soon realized we were going in circles. Landmarks we'd passed hours ago suddenly loomed out of the fog ahead of us. It was as if the mountain itself was trying to prevent our escape. Exhausted and disoriented, we made camp for the night. None of us wanted to sleep, but we were running on fumes. We agreed to take turns standing watch. I volunteered for the first shift. As my companions drifted into uneasy slumber, that unsettling hum returned. It started low, barely perceptible, but grew in volume until it seemed to reverberate through my bones. The fog began to glow with a diffuse blue light. Shadowy shapes moved within the mist, towering spindly forms that defied description. I wanted to wake the others, but found myself paralyzed. All I could do was watch in mute terror as the shapes drew closer, resolving into something like a cross between a praying mantis and a human. Just as the nearest entity reached out an impossibly long, jointed arm towards me, a ear-splitting shriek pierced the night. The fog dissipated in an instant, taking the creatures with it. I turned to see Lisa bolt upright, eyes wide with panic. She'd jolted awake from some nightmare, inadvertently saving us all. We didn't wait for dawn. We packed up and continued our descent in the dark, using headlamps to light the treacherous path. As the sun rose, we finally broke through the tree line. The familiar contours of the foothills were the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. We made it back to civilization, but found our ordeal was far from over. All of our camera equipment and measuring devices had been fried. Not a single photo or data point survived. When we tried to describe our experiences to others, the words turned to ash in our mouths. It was as if some force was preventing us from fully articulating what we'd seen. In the months since, I've thrown myself into researching the area's history and folklore. I've found oblique references to those who walk between and the watchers on high in some obscure texts, but nothing concrete. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, the phantom sound of that hum ringing in my ears. I've developed a nervous tic of constantly checking over my shoulder. My dreams are haunted by visions of those spindly forms emerging from the mist. Part of me wants to mount another expedition to find proof of what we encountered, but a larger part hopes I never see those mountains again. Whatever dwells up there, it's not meant for human understanding. We were lucky to make it out alive. I fear anyone else who ventures into that realm may not be so fortunate. I don't know if I'll ever fully process what happened during those terrifying days. All I know is that my view of reality has been fundamentally shaken. There are things out there beyond our comprehension, forces that defy explanation, and sometimes ignorance truly is bliss. If you're planning a trip into remote wilderness, my advice is this: stick to well-traveled routes. Don't go poking into places humans weren't meant to tread, because you never know what ancient alien intelligence might be waiting there, watching from the shadows. And once you've glimpsed it, you can never truly unsee it. That knowledge will haunt you for the rest of your days. I was part of a team of biologists conducting a routine survey in the Mojave Desert Conservation Area. It was supposed to be a standard 2-week expedition to catalog native species and assess the health of the ecosystem. Little did I know that this trip would completely shatter my understanding of the natural world and leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about desert ecology. The first few days were uneventful. We set up our base camp near a small oasis, grateful for the shade provided by the few scraggly trees. During the day, we'd fan out across the sun-baked landscape, taking soil samples, setting up camera traps, and recording observations of the hardy plants and animals that called this harsh environment home. It was on the fourth day that things started to get strange. I was out on my own, about 2 miles from camp, when I noticed some unusual tracks in the sand. At first glance, they looked like snake tracks, but they were far too large, easily a foot wide, and they didn't match the sinuous pattern of any snake I'd ever encountered. These tracks were arrow-straight, as if whatever made them had moved with singular purpose across the dunes. I snapped some photos and collected a plaster cast, eager to show my colleagues back at camp. But when I tried to follow the tracks to their source, they simply vanished about a half-mile later. It was as if whatever made them had appeared out of thin air, traveled in a straight line, then disappeared just as suddenly. That night around the campfire, I showed the others what I'd found. There was a lot of excited chatter and speculation, but no one could offer a satisfactory explanation. We agreed to keep our eyes peeled for anything else out of the ordinary. We didn't have to wait long. The very next day, Jenna, one of our botanists, came rushing back to camp in a state of agitation. She'd discovered a small grove of trees hidden in a rocky crevice that defied explanation. According to her, the trees were some kind of ancient bristlecone pine, a species that typically grows at much higher elevations in much cooler climates. But these specimens were thriving in the scorching desert heat, their gnarled trunks corkscrewing up towards the sky. When we hiked out to investigate, things got even weirder. As we approached the grove, the air temperature dropped dramatically. It was like stepping into a bubble of mountain air in the middle of the desert. And stranger still, our compasses and GPS devices went haywire, spinning wildly and giving impossible readings. We spent hours examining the trees and taking samples, but we were no closer to explaining their presence. How could they survive here? Why was the air so cool? And what was interfering with our equipment? We left with more questions than answers, and a growing sense of unease about what else we might find out here. The next few days brought a flurry of inexplicable discoveries. We found a dry lake bed studded with perfectly spherical stones, each one exactly 18 inches in diameter. In a narrow canyon, we discovered petroglyphs that seemed to depict bizarre, tentacled creatures emerging from the ground. And most disturbingly, our camera traps kept malfunctioning, but not before capturing blurry images of something large moving in the night, something that didn't match any known desert species. By the end of the first week, the whole team was on edge. We'd come here to study a fragile but familiar ecosystem, and instead we were confronted with mounting evidence that something truly strange was going on. Some of the team wanted to call it quits and head back to civilization, but others, myself included, felt compelled to press on and try to make sense of what we were seeing. It was on day 9 that things went from weird to terrifying. I woke up before dawn, unable to sleep, and decided to watch the sunrise from a nearby ridge. As the first rays of light crept across the desert floor, I noticed something odd. The shadows cast by the rocks and cacti seemed to be moving independently of the sun's position, writhing and twisting as if they had a life of their own. I blinked hard and rubbed my eyes, convinced I was seeing things. But when I looked again, the shadows were still moving, and they seemed to be converging, flowing across the sand like spilled ink, gathering into a large, dark mass at the base of the ridge. My heart was pounding as I watched the amorphous shadow grow larger and more defined. It began to take on a vaguely humanoid shape, but grotesquely elongated and constantly shifting. Then, to my horror, it began to climb the ridge towards me. I was frozen in place, my mind reeling as it tried to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. Shadows don't move on their own. They don't coalesce into three-dimensional forms. They don't climb rocks with purpose. But this one was doing exactly that, and as it neared the top of the ridge, I saw that it had eyes, dozens of them, glowing with an eerie bioluminescence, all fixed on me. That's when my survival instinct finally kicked in. I turned and ran, scrambling down the other side of the ridge in a panic. I could hear something moving behind me, a sound like dry leaves rustling, but amplified 100-fold. I didn't dare look back. I sprinted across the desert, my lungs burning, my legs pumping furiously. I had no idea if I was even going in the right direction, but I knew I had to get back to camp, back to the others. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I finally saw our tents in the distance. I burst into camp, gasping and wild-eyed, trying to explain what I'd seen between ragged breaths. The others looked at me with a mix of concern and skepticism. I realized how insane it all sounded, living shadows with glowing eyes chasing me across the desert. But then we heard it, that same rustling sound growing louder, coming from just beyond the camp perimeter. We all fell silent, straining to listen, and then we saw them, shadows detaching from the early morning gloom, flowing across the sand towards us like living oil slicks. What followed was chaos. People were screaming, grabbing whatever supplies they could, and running in all directions. I saw one of the shadow creatures engulf our team leader, Dr. Reeves. One moment he was there, the next he was just gone, absorbed into the inky blackness. I ran with a few others, our truck keys clutched in my shaking hand. We piled into the vehicle and I floored it, kicking up a rooster tail of sand as we fled. In the rearview mirror, I could see the shadow things flowing after us, but they couldn't match our speed. We drove for hours, not stopping until we reached the nearest town. We were a mess, dehydrated, sunburned, and on the verge of hysterics. When we tried to explain what happened to the local authorities, they clearly thought we were crazy or on drugs. Hell, part of me wondered if that might be the case. How else could I explain what I'd seen? It's been months now, and I still wake up in a cold sweat. The image of those living shadows burned into my mind. The official story is that our expedition suffered from mass hysteria brought on by heat exhaustion and dehydration. They say we imagined it all, but I know what I saw, and I know that out there in the desert, in that supposed conservation area, there are things that defy scientific explanation, things that shouldn't exist, but do. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear that dry rustling sound, as if the shadows are coming for me once again. I don't know if I'll ever go back to field work. How can I, knowing what's out there? All I know is that there are aspects of our world that we don't understand, forces beyond our comprehension. And sometimes ignorance really is bliss, because once you've seen the impossible, once you've been touched by the unknown, you can never truly feel safe again. I was part of a team of marine biologists conducting research off the coast of Redacted when we encountered something that defied explanation. Our expedition had started off routinely enough. We were studying deep-sea ecosystems and collecting data on ocean acidification. But on the third day, things took a turn for the bizarre. We had anchored our research vessel about 20 miles offshore in a remote area known for its rich biodiversity. The weather was clear and calm as we prepared to send down our submersible to collect samples from the ocean floor. I was manning the sonar equipment, monitoring the underwater terrain as the submersible made its descent. At first, everything seemed normal. The seafloor came into view at around 1,000 meters depth, a dark, silty expanse dotted with the occasional rock formation or patch of coral. But as the submersible approached the bottom, I noticed something odd on the sonar. There appeared to be a massive depression or chasm opening up directly beneath us, far larger than anything that should exist in this area, according to our maps. I alerted the rest of the team, and we decided to investigate further. As the submersible's cameras panned across the seafloor, we all crowded around the monitors in stunned silence. An enormous, perfectly circular pit yawned open before us, its edges unnaturally smooth as if carved by intelligent design rather than natural processes. It had to be at least a mile across, and the inky blackness at its center seemed to swallow all light from the submersible's floodlights. "What the hell is that?" muttered Dr. Chen, our lead researcher. None of us had an answer. We debated our next move, eventually deciding to lower the submersible into the pit to get a better look. As it descended, the sonar readings became increasingly erratic. The depth gauge spun wildly, at times showing impossible readings of over 20,000 meters. Suddenly, all of our equipment went haywire. The ship's electronics flickered and died, plunging us into darkness for several terrifying seconds before the emergency generators kicked in. When the monitors came back online, the submersible's camera feed showed only static. Panicked, we tried to re-establish contact, but it was as if the submersible had simply vanished. We had no choice but to begin hauling up the tether cable, praying we'd find the vessel still attached. As we winched up the cable, I noticed something deeply unsettling. Despite the immense length we had lowered into the pit, we seemed to be pulling up far more than we had let out. Hundreds of meters became thousands, then tens of thousands. It was as if the cable was emerging from some impossible depth. Finally, after what felt like hours, we saw something breach the surface. But it wasn't our submersible. A massive obsidian black tentacle erupted from the waves, easily as thick around as a redwood tree. It writhed in the air for a moment before plunging back down, sending a massive swell that rocked our vessel violently. Chaos erupted on deck as more tentacles breached the surface, their skin glistening wetly in the moonlight. They seemed to be searching for something, probing the air around our ship with an unsettling intelligence. I stood frozen in horror, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. This was so far beyond anything in my scientific understanding that I couldn't even begin to rationalize it. One of the tentacles suddenly whipped towards our ship with terrifying speed. I dove for cover, certain we were about to be capsized or crushed. But instead of striking us, it seemed to pause just short of the hull, hovering there as if studying us. In that moment, I felt a presence, an alien consciousness so vast and ancient that my mind recoiled from it. It was as if something down in those impossible depths had sensed our intrusion and reached up to investigate. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any more terrifying, I noticed something that chilled me to my core. The water around the tentacles was changing. It shimmered and warped in ways that defied physics, creating impossible reflections and refractions of light. As I watched in stunned disbelief, I saw glimpses of other places through the distortions, alien vistas of cyclopean cities and vast, starry voids that I knew instinctively were not of our world or even our dimension. The very fabric of reality seemed to be unraveling around us. I heard screams from my colleagues as they too witnessed the impossible sights. Some collapsed, clutching their heads as if in terrible pain. Others simply stood slack-jawed, their minds seemingly broken by what they were experiencing. I don't know how long we remained in that state of abject terror and awe. It could have been minutes or hours. Time itself seemed to lose all meaning in the presence of whatever this entity was. Eventually, mercifully, the tentacles began to recede. The spatial distortions faded, and reality reasserted itself, though it felt fragile, as if it might shatter again at any moment. As the last of the anomalies vanished beneath the waves, we were left in a state of shocked silence. The ocean was calm once more, as if nothing had happened, but we all knew that everything had changed. In the days that followed, we tried to make sense of what we had encountered. We pored over our instruments' data logs, but found little concrete evidence. Most of our equipment had been fried by whatever electromagnetic anomalies accompanied the event. We debated whether to report our findings, knowing that doing so would likely end our careers. In the end, we decided to keep it quiet. Who would believe us anyway? But the memory of that night haunts me still. I know now that there are things lurking in the depths of our oceans that defy all rational explanation, things that perhaps we were never meant to discover. Sometimes late at night, I find myself staring out at the sea, wondering what other secrets it holds, and I pray that they remain hidden, for I fear that mankind is not ready to confront the true nature of our reality. The experience has fundamentally altered my perception of the world and our place in it. I can no longer look at the ocean without a sense of both wonder and deep primal fear. It's as if a veil has been lifted, revealing the true, terrifying scope of the unknown that surrounds us. I've tried to move on with my life and my work, but I find it increasingly difficult to focus on mundane research when I know what's really out there. My colleagues and I rarely speak of that night, but I can see the same haunted look in their eyes that I know must be in mine. There are times when I'm tempted to dive back into that mystery, to seek out the truth behind what we encountered. But then I remember the overwhelming sense of alien intelligence I felt, the sheer, incomprehensible vastness of it, and I know that such knowledge comes at a terrible price. For now, I content myself with more conventional research, all the while carrying the weight of a secret that could shatter our understanding of the world. But I often wonder, how long can we continue to ignore the true wonders and horrors that lurk just beyond the edge of our perception? And what will happen when we can no longer deny their existence? As I write this account, I'm still not sure why I'm sharing it. Perhaps it's a way of unburdening myself, or maybe it's a warning to others who might be tempted to probe too deeply into the unknown. All I know is that the world is far stranger and more terrifying than we can imagine, and some truths are better left undiscovered.